Piers Morgan does it. Everyone has their thing, but then on the main screen, he has them formatted, but then it scales out for the big seats. Those are local recordings. So it'll record, like if we were on your show right now, it'll record my seat backstage, your seat, Wick's seat, everyone's seat separately.
Oh, that's a lot better.
Yes. So dig into that, turn on local recordings, and I think pretty sure that's the way it works. Pretty sure that's what I saw, because it had like the Powder, Dusty, Beth, this person, that person. So
nice. That'll save me from my laziness of just hitting go to YouTube and then never looking at it again, which I think is not the right way to do it. But
if you look at the AI clips, some of it is smart enough. It'll pull just their video and pop it in, and it's better than doing it if we're all like 10 seats, right? The way I have it, it'll get blurry. And you lose the production quality. Anyways.
Yeah, I did. I was funny. I checked it on you, then I was like, I wonder how Sarah's doing. And I clicked on your show, and it just says tarred panel. And you're like, God, this is a tarred panel. And I'm okay.
We had a nip pulled out. I'm going to refrain from using the full word just in case, Wick, but girl completely flopped whole thing out. And I was like, what is going on? People were using words. I completely deleted an entire stream. I was so irritated. I was angry. The world could burn that day and I wouldn't care. What's
with people taking out their private parts on stream? Last night, some guy brought out his balls and just put out his balls on stream. Luckily, I was able to trim that part out so I can still use it, right? But
I mean, did it look like a map of Iraq?
No,
that's a deep cut Arrested Development joke.
No, apparently this girl does this to people. So I sent out the warning, a picture of her and name, and let everybody else know in the panel space not to let her on, because we've heard that she does this all the time. So it was really weird though. All right. So we are all doing, thank you so much for doing this, by the way. Ryan, I was really excited to get this topic rolling, and Wick and you, I'm glad we could find a prompt that worked for the international law. Wait, who has Wick has the affirmative. Wick has the affirmative, yes, because it's an ought. The United States comply.
Yes, we should, in my opinion.
Yes, we should. And Ryan, you are I would say affirmative no, because you're no, we not. Because it's not a statement, it's a question.
I'm not affirmative no, because the question is, ought we comply with international law? I don't think that, I mean, we'll see if maybe this is a debate where discussion breaks out. My answer isn't that we should never comply with international law. My answer is that international law is not morally binding on us. So we
because it's an ought.
We comply with it when we pick and choose, basically. And that's right.
And Wick, you are yes, but you have some caveats built in too.
Usually should, but not always.
Yeah.
Right.
So
okay, so this will be a nice one more majority one way and one majority the other way, but you guys will have some overlap. You'll probably agree.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
probably.
I think the extreme yes nos are basically insane positions that no one would take. Hopefully, but.
I guess we'll see. We'll see what the panel does. Okay. 8-minute openings to each of you. Use it all if you will. Short and sweet's my favorite, but it is yours. I'm not going to hard lock the time, but I'll give you a 30-second heads up if it's starting to look like it's going a little lengthy. So Wick, you are the open. Ryan, you have second words on the way back out. On closing statements, Ryan, you will have the first out, and Wick, you have the final say. We'll read and respond to the super chats. Then, of course, we'll move into open panel. I have changed my open panel rules. The first portion of open panel is those 7 people come on one at a time, get to have a little 2 to 3 minute conversation with you, ask their question, you respond to them and only them. Everyone else is muted and shuts the fuck up. We'll do the round robin of that. Then we switch over to full gauntlet mode. I'll switch the channel, all of that. Then it's open panel, whatever. Now, you have the option. You can stay for the questions. You can stay for full crazy open panel. You do whatever you will. But to make it better for debaters so that you can actually still continue the conversation more formally, I like this presentation better. And it's people get bored waiting, but whatever. You want to ask your question. So first 7 backstage that are cammed up, get up first. Any questions on that fact or anything going on?
No, ma'am.
Sounds good.
Okay. Let me just run to the ladies' room real quick, super fast, and then we'll kick it off.
Sounds good. Well, I hope everyone's doing well. Hi to Ryan's audience. Hi to my audience.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'll see Wick tonight. Ryan's generally a good guy. I don't usually have a big issue with things he says. You saw Wick yesterday, gang. You probably won't see it this time. I don't think that he's going to accuse me of loving rape. So I think we're okay.
You don't love rape?
Not usually.
I heard that about you.
It's crazy. But we had I don't know, just people like to ascribe the most odd positions to me. And it's always weird to me when people argue with me about what I mean when I say things. So if I make a statement, instead of just asking what I mean, they simply tell me what they think I mean instead of simply asking. And if they had asked, they'd find out what they thought I meant wasn't correct. And I could simply tell them because I know what I said and I know what I meant. So I don't know. Yeah. It's just weird, a weird behavior I have noticed online.
I mean, I think that's kind of just how it goes. This is a weird clickbaity sort of environment, and people are generally speaking out of their minds. So it's a noble fight, but you do run into some crazies now and again.
Now and again. I don't know. It makes it fun sometimes. It's good content on occasion, right? Like yesterday was a terrible debate, but great content. So.
Okay. So, and again, I know you both have been here before, but my rules are personal shit off my screen. Don't talk about each other's wives, girlfriend, boyfriend, kids, whatever, grandma. It doesn't belong here. It's not on topic. I don't want to hear about it. If you had any beef before this, I don't want to hear about it during the debate. If you want to go into it during gauntlet style, that's fine, but it doesn't belong during the debate topic. Mind the interruptions. You guys know how I feel about that. Please be mindful if the other person's talking. Just let them finish their statement, whatever they're saying. If it goes too far, I'll tell them to land the plane. But if you start interrupting, then I have to give them the leeway because now you're interrupting. Biggest pet peeve. Mudsling, fine game. Keep it entertaining, but don't make it the entirety of the debate. We don't want to sit here and just hear you guys mudsling each other all night. It's not worth it. Okay. Questions, comments? Well, good luck to you both. Thank you again, and let's have some fun. I'm going to tuck you both backstage. I'm going to play the intro video. I'll pop you back up about 30 seconds before the video goes down. Here we go. Good luck.
These videos are always funny.
Generally, you said feminism is neutral. Here's what actually happened.
The foundation of all money. I'm really mad that
what difference does it make, right? What
Stop.
The deregulation of the industry is obviously going to cause more of that industry.
To lubricate the trust connection between people until they have enough.
Yet we could still look at biological reality in determining who's a female, even if there are.
Why don't you denounce feminism the same way you're denouncing capitalism? If you don't...
For something to be objective, it needs to be verifiable. And you can't verify...
If I make a claim as a political pundit, it is true that I definitely could be wrong.
Yeah,
you're promoting, right?
Ideology is the main thing of politics, right? This is my ideology.
So 2015, anyone go back and watch the footage? The first GOP debate.
Cool. Robert. Oh, that? With a crowbar, you said.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Mater Nation. I am Sarah, the Raging Tomato, bringing to you another live one-on-one debate with none other than Wick TV and Ryan Mullally. I always Mullally. I want to say but whatever. I get it. I'll fix it. I'll fix it eventually.
It's a nightmare. It's not your fault. It's been happening my whole life. It'll keep happening. All good.
Fair enough. Fair enough. At least it's not just me. They are both here to debate the question or statement. Ought the United States comply with international law? Wick, I will leave the floor open to you with your affirmative statement, please.
Sure. It is 1931. Japan has just invaded Manchuria. The League of Nations, the body at the time seeking to enforce international law, fails in its duty to uphold the law and does nothing but send a sternly worded letter condemning their actions. It is 1935. Italy has just taken Ethiopia. The League of Nations, the body at the time seeking to enforce international law, fails in its duty to uphold the law, imposing weak economic sanctions that have no bite. It is 1936. Germany has just crossed into the Rhineland. The League of Nations, the body at the time seeking to enforce international law, condemns the action, but did nothing else, thus failing in its duty to uphold the law. What happened next was inevitable. When international law was not upheld or complied with or enforced, war descended upon the world, leading to horror and death at unprecedented scale. Since then, the world, led by the U.S., took the lessons from this conflict and the events leading up to it to establish what some might call the international rules-based order. Others, the liberal world order, etc. There's plenty of names for it. We set up a system of treaties, conventions, norms, and laws that govern interactions between nations, organizations, and individuals. And that's what international law is at the heart of it. It is a system of laws, conventions, norms, rules, treaties, etc. that govern how nations interact not only with each other, but with individuals and organizations. These laws don't just cover conflict, but a whole host of interactions. You have the World Trade Organization, which enriches Americans' lives by helping to protect things like intellectual property, preventing harmful trade wars, and generally lowering costs to consumers. The U.S. helped establish the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, both crucial to economic stability and helping to create and enforce a unified international system of lending and monetary exchange that allows us to help head off global economic catastrophes at a fraction of the cost it would take us to do so on our own. The ICAO's aviation standards have halved global accidents since 1990, ensuring safe travel and commerce for American airlines. The UPU streamlines postal services, saving the USPS millions yearly and boosting over $1 trillion in electronic commerce. In health, WHO, or the World Health Organization's international health regulations, coordinate pandemic responses, speeding U.S. vaccine development and averting economic hits from outbreaks like Ebola. The U.S., since its inception, has signed over 18,000 international treaties, both multilateral and bilateral, and is currently party to around 200 major international multilateral agreements and treaties. They govern everything from commerce to space. The fact that we are sitting here in our rooms right now and having a conversation is made in part possible by international law governing satellites and their orbits. That said, I'm sure my opponent might point out some specific international laws he does not like, or institutions governing said laws he feels has acted poorly or failed, and I might even agree with him in those cases. But this is not an argument against international law, or if we should comply with it, but rather specific laws or bodies within the system. Me criticizing, for example, a specific law that the United States holds is not asking for the abolishment of law as a concept, nor would be pointing out that the police, an institution that upholds the law, on occasion fails in their duties and acts poorly, is not me calling for police abolishment, nor would it be a good idea to abolish police simply because some of them act poorly. International law is the same. Just because there are some institutions who have failed or who act poorly or who do not uphold international law as they should, or some of the laws aren't in our interest, does not mean we should not comply with international law as a general rule, but merely change the laws that might be onerous towards us. Since the establishment of the international rules-based order. Okay, which the U.S. has led the way in building. By the way, we are one of the forefront architects, the major architects of this. Deaths in conflict across the globe have decreased dramatically. The amount of wars has decreased dramatically. And the U.S. and the world are far wealthier. Poverty has been decreased, etc. To say we ought not comply with international law would be to abandon the gains that we have seen due to its inception and enforcement, which should be, to be clear, led by the U.S. I think the U.S. should be the world police in a large way. I think it makes us better. I think it makes us safer. And I trust us to enforce these laws in a way I do not trust other bodies to do so. But that is still international law. That is still upholding international law. And that is still an argument for international law, just led by us, which is what I'm here to argue for. The potential consequences of abandoning international law writ large are disastrous. And that is my opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Wick. And Ryan, to you, please.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, if you don't know me, I'm Ryan Mullally. I have a channel called Natural Law with Ryan Mullally, and I am, I guess is relevant to this conversation, an attorney. And for the first couple of years of my practice, I practiced international law. And no, the U.S. does not have a moral obligation to uphold international law. There's no ought here. Rather, what the U.S. does is what the U.S. has always done, which is that the U.S. complies with international law when it is in the U.S.'s best interest to do so, and does not comply with international law when it's not in our interest to do so. Anytime that there's a moral compulsion here, it's because the moral compulsion exists from who we are as a state. It's the sort of thing that we ought to do. It comes from our own interest, it comes from natural law, but the ought never comes from international law. We pick and choose when we comply with international law and when we don't. And that's actually well and good and is part of the world order that Wick set up. It's actually always been our policy in this World War II era, but now people are just kind of catching up and paying attention to it. So what do I mean by that? Well, in case after case, if you look at how international law is structured, it is structured so that the US has the option to comply or not comply. The Security Council of the United Nations is the primary enforcement mechanism for international law as relates to armed conflict between nations. Is a war illegal? Is a US strike illegal? Is the conflict in Iran illegal? These questions are primarily decided by the UN Security Council. But how is the UN Security Council set up? 5 nations, Russia, China, England, France, and the US have permanent veto power in the Security Council. So does it violate international law when the US struck Iran, when it struck Venezuela, when it struck the Venezuelan fishing boats? We'll never know, because if it ever came up in the Security Council, the US would simply veto. Ditto when Russia invaded Ukraine. Ditto if China eventually decides to invade Taiwan. These are questions that the international world order is set up to treat differently. Major powers are treated differently. The check on major powers is each other, not international law. But even if we could figure out what international law is, and as I've just pointed out, oftentimes we can't because there's no body that has binding authority to tell us what international law is in a given instance. Even if we could, the US has always taken the position that it can pick and choose. For example, I litigated a case in my practice where a man that I was representing was held in death row in Texas. He was a Mexican, and when he was arrested, the state of Texas should have, under the terms of the Vienna Treaty on Consular Convention, should have notified Mexico that he was arrested so Mexico could choose whether or not to send a lawyer to represent him or take other actions. Texas did not do so. Now, is the US a party to that multilateral agreement? Absolutely. Did they ratify it? Absolutely. Did this go to the International Court of Justice? It sure did. Did the ICJ rule against the United States? It sure did. But then when we went back to the Supreme Court and we said the International Court of Justice has said this violates international law, what are we going to do? The Supreme Court said Texas can do whatever it wants. And Texas said, we don't care about international law. Now, why is that the case? Because it is not in the US's interests to subordinate its constitution or its states' rights to international bodies. So the United States correctly decided, though it hurt my client at the time, that it was not obligated to comply with international law because it's not. Wick brought up the WTO. The WTO makes all kinds of trade rulings. When the Biden administration put tariffs on, the Trump administration put tariffs on China for aluminum and steel, and then Biden maintained those tariffs, there was a WTO case, and the U.S. lost. Did the U.S. relinquish its tariffs? No, because it wasn't in the U.S.'s interest to do so. And it was correct not to do so because the U.S. doesn't subordinate our foreign policy to international bodies. This list could go on and on and on. The U.S. always takes the position that it is not subject to foreign nations. It is not subject to international organizations. One of the most famous lulls of all in recent memory was when during the conflict between Israel and Palestine, people were saying that President Trump was going to be hauled before the International Criminal Court and brought up on international war crimes. But of course, the US is one of the very few nations that is not a party to the Rome Statute. And the International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction over citizens of the United States. And furthermore, there is a standing law called the Protection of Servicemen Act, or nicknamed the Invade the Hague Act, which gives the president preemptive authorization to invade Europe if a single member of the US government or the US military is ever detained or held by the ICC. This is the American position on international law, and it always has been. It's a system of rules, and Wick is correct. It's a system of rules that we set up to benefit us, but whether or not we comply with those rules has always been up to us. We do not subordinate ourselves to international bodies, and we ought not do so because we are one of the few great powers that remain. And international law, and in terms of international law, we are treated differently. We should be treated differently, and we should not subordinate ourselves or our sovereignty to international law simply because it has the word law in it.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And as a kind reminder to the audience, we are going to get through the debate. Then we will move into closing statements. We will read and respond to your kind super chats. And then, of course, we will move into open panel. So if you have questions or comments on the debate, hang tight and don't be afraid to click that StreamYard link once it gets dropped to the live chat. I do believe Wick and Ryan are both dual streaming at the same time, so please feel free to make your way over, hit the like button, share, subscribe, and send them all of your love and donos as well. Gentlemen, I leave the floor open to you.
Sure. In 2006, the U.S. Congress repealed cotton subsidy programs that the World Trade Organization found inconsistent with its global trade obligations. In 2007 through 2012, the U.S. used a controversial zeroing method to calculate anti-dumping duties, which inflated tariffs on foreign goods, and they lost the case to the World Trade Organization. And guess what? We complied. Tax breaks after 2000, when the World Trade Organization ruled against U.S. tax systems that subsidize exports. The U.S. passed new legislation to overhaul its export tax rules and make it compliant with the World Trade Organization. When Ryan says that we never subordinate our will towards these international organizations, he is just incorrect.
No, Wick, let
me finish, please, before you interrupt.
Let him finish his thought.
Let me finish before you interrupt. So when you say, like, we never, and it is never in our interest to subordinate our will towards these international organizations that we set up, which you acknowledge to benefit us, you're just factually incorrect. Do you acknowledge that?
No, because you're misrepresenting what I said, so it doesn't matter how you characterize it. What I'm saying, Wick, is that if you look at nations, for example, in Europe, it's very common that treaty law is at the same level of authority as their constitutional law, which is how the European Union was structured. So many countries in Europe, if they sign a treaty, it has the same binding force as the highest possible law in their nation. And that's why the EU can function the way it does. That's not how the US functions. If we ratify a treaty, even if we choose to ratify it, and we often don't choose to ratify them, but even if we do, we have the option to pick and choose. We often will comply with international law if it is in our interest to do so. We will not if it's not. So yes, there are cases where we complied with the WTO, but as I gave in my opening, the example when our tariffs of China were challenged, we ignored the WTO, and this is the position that we take. For example, Wick, do you think we should remove the landmines between North Korea and South Korea? Almost every nation on earth believes that landmines violate international law. We're one of the few holdouts.
Demilitarized zone, you mean, between North and South Korea?
Yeah,
I don't know the specifics of what that would entail.
There's an Ottawa Convention against the use of landmines. Almost every nation on earth has ratified it, but the U.S. has chosen not to.
I don't believe we should obey every single treaty that we don't sign. But to be clear, we are currently, like today, as we sit here, we have not only signed but ratified over 200 multilateral international organizations. We have given our word that we will obey the rules and regulations as laid down in this.
We
never
often
do, as you stated. Please don't interrupt me. As you have stated. So yes, I, sitting here today, have the option to obey a law or disobey a law, whether that be a national law or an international law. That exists. That is my right as an individual who is a free individual to make choices. There are, however, consequences when I disobey a law. When the U.S. disobeys an international law that they have agreed to, it hurts us overall. I would argue that on the whole, overall, in most cases, our failure to uphold our word, which we give, even, yes, we make carve-outs to some of these treaties, right? But those are built into the treaties, right? That happens, absolutely. But when we say we're not going to listen to this international body that we have set up, why should anyone else? And that makes the world a less safe place.
Yeah.
That makes it more dangerous for U.S. travelers. That makes us less money. That creates trade wars. That just hurts us, our standing as a world power overall. It also emboldens other actors, which we saw before in my opening to World War II, right? The failure of major powers to comply or to enforce rulings that they have made just embolden others to act the same way. We can look at Russia and Ukraine right now.
You're almost agreeing with my point, the way you're framing this.
Agreeing with me, to be clear.
When there's an international body, we comply when it is in our interest to do so, and we stop when it's not.
Yeah, but that's my argument, and this is the whole debate, is that it is in our interest.
Let Ryan go on.
You just had like a long thing.
You did.
We comply when it is in our interest. We stop complying when it is not. Now, it is, I agree with you, in our best interest to have fruitful trade deals. So we are likely to comply in a situation where it benefits us to do so. But when it stops, we stop. The WTO is a great example. We've been accusing China of currency manipulation, of unfair trade deals, of IP theft, of a variety of violations of the norms and regulations that the WTO would promulgate for years and years and years and years. And China has consistently said, we don't care. So when there was a WTO case involving China, we said we don't care because we're not obligated to do this in any moral sense that's binding on us. It's just a question of what is beneficial for us at that time.
Do you not think we have a moral obligation to keep our word as a nation?
Were you finished, Ryan? I want to make sure.
I think it's deeply subordinate to our obligation to promote our interests, the interests of our citizens.
Well, that's the argument. I believe it is in our interest to comply, to keep our word. And yes, you are correct when you point out that sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But the whole argument that we are having, the whole debate is ought we. And my argument is that we ought because it is generally in our best interest to have reciprocal, honest dealings with not only our allies, but our rivals as well. That is in our interest. When we are seen as honest actors, it gives us access. It gives us reciprocity reciprocal dealings, okay, with other countries that they uphold. When we fail to do so, or are seen as fail to do so, they are less likely to make positive deals with us, which is not in our interest. This is the whole argument. You just seem to be agreeing with me and ceding the debate just off the bat, which is fine. You can do that if you'd like, but and we can have just a conversation of when is good and when is bad to break our word. But in general, overall, most of the time, we have an interest as a nation in being seen as honest actors that other countries can come to and be treated fairly with respect. Do you disagree with that statement?
No, I agree we have the interest, but
then
but
you
the moral,
agree with
but
my
the moral
premise
force
that we
is
ought
not
to obey.
Hold on, Wick,
you
you
asked
asked the question.
You gotta let me
Yeah, but
answer.
there's got a follow-up to it.
You got
Let him
I get more
answer.
than one
Wick.
word.
Yeah, let him answer.
I agree that it is often in our interest to promote a world order that benefits us. The issue I'm taking with you, Wick, is that the moral obligation there, the moral force, doesn't come from international law. It comes from promoting the U.S.'s self-interests. So, of course, the second that it stops promoting our interests, we take a different position and we change our mind. And of course we would do that. Like, Wick, I've got to, for example, I know that you're a big supporter of Ukraine.
Yes.
Right? Do you think it's good that we were providing cluster munitions to the Ukraine? Sorry, Ukraine, not the Ukraine.
I don't know, actually. That is something that is one of the things where you might convince me that it was good to break international law when it comes to cluster munitions, but I have very deep reservations about it because it emboldens people like Russia and say, well, if the U.S. isn't going to, why should we? So my whole argument, just to repeat, if you believe that, as I think you just agreed to, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it is in the U.S.'s interest for other countries to see us as honest dealers and to come to us to be treated fairly, then you would agree that we ought to follow international law, because our following of international law makes us seem more honest and deal-worthy. Morality is a separate topic here. I'm not talking about morality in this instance. I'm talking about pragmatism. I'm talking about the actual kind of realpolitik of if we want allies to trust us, we have to be trustworthy. If they do not trust us, and the less they trust us, the less willing they are to get in bed with us and make deals with us, and we have to resort to force when we could use soft power, which is much cheaper, much less risky, and just better overall for the world and the U.S. as well.
Wick, my point is that there's no ought there that's based on international law. The ought is based off, as you said, U.S. pragmatism and self-interest. So but there's a very big difference in saying we ought comply with international law and then we ought do whatever is in our best interest. Like the example I gave about the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations in my opening with my poor client who was on death row in Texas for 40 years. The reason that the U.S. did not honor its obligations and did not honor the ICJ ruling in that case is that the U.S. determined that our federalism and our idea of states' rights and our idea of states' role in the criminal justice system of the United States was more important constitutionally within the U.S. than our international obligations were. So even though it would surely be good for relations with Mexico to comply with the ICJ's ruling in that case, we did not, because we think that we have a different view of our Constitution and our sovereignty. And this is the through line for all these examples. We are willing to play these games when they benefit us, but when they stop benefiting us, we stop playing. And that's because international law doesn't itself provide the ought to us. What provides the ought is U.S. pragmatism and U.S. interests.
And yet the ought is still provided. And yet the ought is still there, regardless of the source of the ought. And this is where your argument fails. Regardless of whether it comes from international law itself, the ought exists separate from that, but it points us towards compliance and obedience with international law because it is in our best interest in most cases for a variety of reasons. Do you think that we should be involved on the world stage as a power, that we should exercise
obviously
hard military might and also soft power. You agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. And in order to do so, especially our hard power, we require allies to project force. We have treaties with NATO is a big one, right? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? And we also have treaties with other countries that allow us to put bases and ports and allow us to use their ports to refuel, to help transfer munitions, all these things, which allows us to project our power across the globe in a way that is unprecedented in world history. One of the ways we are able to do that is because we have established trust with our allies that enables us to make these deals. It is in our interest to comply with the laws and regulations that we had a major hand in setting up, because it allows us to have these deals with these countries to do these things when we need to. Now, again, it's not a suicide pact, right? Like, if there are incidents where international law would prevent us from doing something we need to do to survive, then sure, you can make the argument, I'm not a law cuck in that way, right? But my argument tonight is that overall, in general, we ought do so. And it doesn't really matter if the ought doesn't come from international law itself.
Oh, no, it absolutely matters, because what's happening now geopolitically is that over time, as China has challenged U.S. hegemony, many of these systems that have set up no longer benefit the U.S. as much as we would like. One of the problems that we've historically had with China is the way that they steal intellectual property, manipulate their currency, abuse trade agreements, et cetera, in a way that damages us. Now, as these games become less beneficial to the US, the question is going to be, do we want to keep playing or not? And the answer is not, we ought to keep playing because we agreed to. The answer is, we should do whatever is in the US's best interests. And that's always going to be the case. So it matters a great deal where the ought is coming from, because I would agree with you that when we violate international law, when we break a treaty, when we do any of these things, a part that you should consider is, how will this impact us geopolitically? What will our allies think? That's part of the pragmatic calculation, but that's not, the answer is not international law says we ought do it, therefore we ought do it. The answer is, we will do whatever is in the US's best interest. And that's what we do. And it's kind of, Wick, to be honest with you, what we've always done. I mean, if you looked at a map and said, in which countries is food a human right? I believe on paper, though many of them, they're starving, but on paper, food is a human right in basically every nation in the world, almost, except for the US and Israel. It's almost all of them. And the reason is because there's international covenants on human rights. There's the European Covenant on Human Rights, and the US doesn't do any of that stuff because the US doesn't believe that we should have international law subordinate our constitutional setup about what rights are. There's rights on the law of the sea. There's the about how far out on the coastal water each country controls the territory. The US did not ratify that. We didn't ratify the landmine treaty. We didn't ratify the treaty on cluster munitions. We didn't ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Kyoto Protocols on climate change, death penalty norms, the Covenant on cluster munitions, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We exclude from our purview anything we disagree with. And if it turns out down the road we didn't exclude something, we just do what we ought to do, what we think we ought to do anyway. And that's because we prioritize our interests over some freestanding moral obligation to international law.
Okay, you are under the misconception that my argument is primarily a moral one. It is not, as a pragmatic one. And as a pragmatic you also seem to be under the misconception that anytime a treaty is proposed, it if we fail to ratify it or fail to be a signatory or disagree with it, that it counts as international law and it counts as us breaking international law.
It often does.
So
as a technical matter, it often does.
Let him finish.
Yeah, if I may finish, right? This idea that we should always do what's in our best interest, I agree. But it is in our best interest to follow international laws, especially the ones that we ratify, like the Geneva Convention, like the ICOA, right? Like the UPU, like the World Bank, like the World Health Organization. These are all things that help us, that make the world a better place. And if the world's a better place, it's a safer place, and it's easier for people, American citizens, to go out, to travel, to be safe, to be unaccosted, because wealth does help reduce conflict worldwide. And when you have organizations and institutions that we have helped set up to be able to arbitrate conflict, it provides a way for countries to settle disputes that do not involve kinetic force, right? That do not involve armies. And so instead of, when they have a dispute on, say, I don't know, international waters, right? And let me, I had an example here. I think it was Australia and another country had a dispute about, who gets the rights to fish here and things like that. Instead of going to war with each other, they were able to take it to the international bodies, and they were able to make a dispute and have their dispute settled in a way that both countries accepted. By our following these laws ourselves, it encourages these other countries to also follow these laws. Again, this isn't something that I'm arguing from a moral stance right now, though there is a moral question of should we keep our word, and I think that we should, but it is also pragmatic. And again, I think you just see the debate when you say, yes, pragmatically, we should generally keep our word and generally keep these treaties. I think you just
there's a few points there, so I'm gonna have to rattle through them one at a time. The first is, are you familiar with the concept of customary international law?
Sure.
Okay, so international.
Can you define what you mean by that?
Customary international law is when an international law norm becomes ubiquitous enough that it becomes binding, even if there's is no treaty obligation,
or anything
right?
Like that. Yes.
So one of the things that happens, because the U.S. is such an outlier in many cases, like in many cases, you'll see 190 plus countries have ratified a particular convention. For example, the Landmine Convention, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, et cetera, et cetera. The question then becomes, is that customary international law, even if the U.S. has not joined it? Now, that's a lively debate that one can have among scholars, but if it did become customary international law, like if the landmine ban became customary international law, do you think the U.S. ought then remove its landmines? We never agreed to that.
Sure. I think we have a much less interest in doing so, and it's much less dangerous for us, and it's much less harmful for us if we don't follow it up, because we've never agreed to it. And there's a difference between being a rule that you've agreed to and helped craft and signed and ratified, has been through your Congress, than obeying just a convention, basically.
Okay. So then we would agree then that whatever you think we ought to do about international law in general, the category of customary international law is not the same. Like if it was a custom that we did not agree to,
these are different categories.
There's no ought there.
There's different categories. Now, there still could be good arguments to obey the customs. It would depend. And a lot of this is law specific. A lot of this is custom specific, right? But when I'm talking about ought we obey international or comply with international law, I think it is in the U.S.'s best interest, especially in laws we have ratified and signed on to and said we will be subject to obey it. I think the views on America and the international community, when we fail in our duties to do this, go down, and that hurts us.
Okay, so then so customary international law is not within the purview of the things where there's this near universal ought. So that's one category that we've cut out.
You
so
keep
let's
saying
talk
this
about
near universal ought, and I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, you're saying like in general, in most cases, near universally, we ought comply with international law for pragmatic reasons, is how I understood your argument.
Yes.
Customary international law is a big category of international law. We've excluded that from the things that are within your general ought. So
well,
I'm now
again, we haven't entirely excluded that. We just have to look at it differently.
Okay. But
we might ought. Right, yeah. But here's the problem with the topic at all. Like international law.
I was just trying to sum up and then move on to the next topic.
Quick. Just like international law as a body of work and a subject. Like I said in my opening, there was 18,000 treaties the U.S. has signed. Like to expect us, either of us, to be experts on all 18,000 treaties is it's kind of insane.
Of course not. So then the kind of the most obvious piece of, I think, probably the most obvious piece of international law is the UN Charter that made offensive wars violations of international law. That's, I think, probably the one, that's the big one, Article 4. That's the absolute big one. Don't go to war with other countries. It is illegal to do so. But of course, the US has, since the 1940s, and since the UN was formed, has endlessly had offensive wars, some with the UN blessing, many without the UN's blessing. And I guess the question is, are we saying that we ought not have done those things?
So I think you misrepresented that law, right? The saying that there is a law against going on offensive wars and just going to war, that's not entirely true. There are plenty of carve-outs to that, exceptions that built into the system, right? Built into these things where you can go to war under certain conditions. And that's why they have, when you go into the UN, you can look for a use of force, right, declaration, right? Where the UN gives your blessing, as you just said. There are obvious carve-outs and exceptions that they allow this to. And the US has done that many times. Our failure to do that in some ways recently, modern history, has cost us. We failed to get a UN Security Council's use of force authorization to go into Iraq. France and I think one other country was saying they wouldn't give it to us. They'd veto it if it came to a vote, because the UN inspectors that were looking for weapons of mass destruction and things like that at the time, right, said that Iraq was complying. The U.S. inspections were doing their job. There weren't any weapons of mass destruction there. We ignored them, and we went in anyway. Do you think that was a good decision by the U.S.
to ignore the Security Council?
See, they ignored the Security
process
Council.
There. Yeah, I think
and they decided to go into Iraq because we believed that they had weapons of mass destruction, and then we stayed there for about 20 years. And I think to some extent,
the Iraq War is not something I would defend here. I think what I'm trying to get at is that process where you try to get UN Security Council sign off is a joke.
It's a joke. By listening to it, we would have saved ourselves 20 years of conflict.
It's a joke, Wick, because the three primary powers that engage in geopolitical struggle right now are the US, Russia, and China. None of those countries are ever going to get Security Council sign-off to do any military action against one of the allies or proxy states of another. So, for example, getting China to sign off on our strike on Venezuela would be impossible. They would simply veto. Getting us to bless them invading Ukraine would have been impossible. We would simply veto. So but the flip side of that is, if the US or China or Russia violates Article 4 and does an offensive war, who decides? Who punishes that? Who enforces Article 4? The Security Council, where, of course, Russia, China, and the US all have veto power. This is a law that applies to other people. This is a thing that applies to lesser powers. But amongst the great powers, this does not have any teeth whatsoever. It's a sham of a process, so we can and should ignore it when we think it's in our best interests. Now, in the Iraq War, we could have been, maybe we were wrong. Maybe that wasn't in our best interest. But we don't need to debate that because that's not the point. The point is that we would violate the process if we thought it was in our interests, and if we didn't think it was in our process, then we go along with it. It's all about us and thinking about what we want to do, not about whether or not we're bound to this process.
During the process, one of the reasons that France was going to veto it if we carried out with it, and we went in to get a UN security clearance to get a use of force things, was because they correctly pointed out the flaws in our intelligence and the flaws in how we were going about justifying the war, and saying, actually, no, our inspection teams are actually working. Had we listened to that process, right? Had we complied with that process, in this occasion, we would be better off as a country. Now, I would agree with you. If this argument that we were having today was, is the UN a good institution? I might say no. I think one of the problems with the UN is that it does lack teeth, and that it does put bad actors in positions to veto things, that actors who do not comply in general with international law. But that is not an argument against international law. That is an argument against the UN. These are separate things. Let me finish, please. Like this idea, right, that simply because an institution has failed in its duties, that we should abandon the concepts that it says it seeks to uphold, I think is farcical.
Well, but the thing about this is that it becomes ultimately a little bit of a silly let's pick and choose exercise if you're taking the ought position. And here's what I mean. Let's imagine that the Trump administration did have real, actuable, verifiable intelligence that but for our strikes on Iran was going to have nukes within a matter of weeks. Like they were on the precipice. I don't know that that's true. You don't know if that's true, but let's just presume it's true for the sake of the question, right? We, as good little boys, go to the UN Security Council and say, Security Council, we would like to do something about this threat developing in Iran, and China vetoes. Should we then do nothing because we were denied our authorization by the Security Council? Or should we ignore the Security Council and do what we need to do?
So I guess I'll answer that by, and I don't mean to be a weasel here, but I'm going to ask you a question in return. Say we do go to our allies, right, to France, to Britain, and we present them the evidence and say, hey, gang.
You got to answer my question before I do this.
No, I think that if China's the one that vetoes it, we should ignore them.
Well,
but if
why?
France
why
is the one who vetoes it, should we ignore them?
It depends.
I think that, yes, true, but I would in general, trust France more than China.
Sure, I trust France more than China.
Exactly.
That's not. But my point is, we will ignore it or not based off of our assessment of our best interests every single time.
But your argument,
so there's no ought there. There's no ought to this UN process. It's just if it looks like it's in our best interest, we'll follow it. If it doesn't look like it's in our best interest, we'll ignore it. There's no ought. It's just simply the U.S. doing what's in its best interest.
There's no enforcement. It's not there's no ought. I think we ought comply in general with international law. Should we, again, do I have problems with the way that the Security Council conducts itself and it's set up? Yes. Would I like to reform it? Yes. But that is not an argument against international law or compliance with international law, nor is pointing out exceptions to when we should ignore international law. Again, there are times when I would advocate people ignore national law, and I have before, right? Like there are times when we should ignore, as moral actors and as people who are pragmatic even, we should ignore laws. Like, I'm not a law cuck. But that's not an argument against law itself. I think in general, people should comply with law. And I think in general, countries should comply with law.
When it's
and in
not
general,
in our
the United States should comply with international law, especially since we set it up.
Yeah. Except for the situations where it's not in our interest to do so, in which case it's fine to disregard it.
But in most cases, it's in our interest to do so.
Hold on.
Which means, Wick, that there's no ought there.
That's not what it means.
International law is not providing the ought to the U.S. What is providing the ought to the U.S. is the U.S.'s assessment of its interests. And so, yes, of course, if China was vetoing us from a necessary military action, we would ignore them. Like, of course we would. It would be crazy not to, and we should. Similarly, when the ICJ rules against us, as they often do, we often ignore them. I gave one case. There was another case about naval mines. I think it was like a 1981, 83 case. I could look it up if we need to. But like when we lose cases before the International Court of Justice, we often do absolutely nothing. We don't make the reparations. We don't comply. We comply when we feel like it. And when we don't feel like it, we don't. And the reason is that international law doesn't provide an ought to the United States. The only thing that provides an ought is the U.S. protecting its own interests. And as the geopolitical order, the post-World War II order, continues to fray, our interests will diverge from international law more and more regularly. And when they do, we ought not go down with the ship. When international law diverges from our interests, we ought ignore it. Just like when it is in our interest to follow it, to comply with it, we ought comply with it. But
then you agree with me that we ought to comply with general law, generally with international law, because generally it's in our interest. Your argument here is that the ought comes from a different place than you think that I'm implying. But that does not matter. The ought still exists. And your framing of when we lose, your framing of when we lose in the ICJ, we generally don't comply is just not true. Like in general, when it comes to border disputes, technical rulings and things like that, we generally comply. It's when it touches things like domestic criminal justice that we generally don't. So this false framing that you put on that we generally don't comply with the ICJ is just not true. It's not based in fact. It's not based in reality. When we look at the actual record of the U.S. complying or not complying with international law, we tend to, as a rule, comply. There are exceptions, major ones in some cases, and I think that we do so. And the reason that we make these treaties and the reason that we go into agreements, these multilateral and even in some cases bilateral agreements, is because we feel as a country, and I think we're generally correct here, that doing so enhances our standing in the world. It allows us to protect force and power, not just hard power, but soft power as well. And it makes the world a better and safer place, not just for the world, but for us and our citizens. This is something where again, if your argument is that the ought doesn't come directly from international law, okay, who cares? So what? It ought be done regardless of where the ought comes from.
No, it matters a great deal.
I don't think it
because if you don't know where the ought comes from, you can't actually predict what the U.S. is going to do or should do in any given circumstances. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's cases where the U.S. complied with ICJ. I'm sure there's cases where they didn't. I know mine was a great example of that. If you haven't had the experience of having the U.S. Supreme Court saying your client can kick rocks, Texas can do whatever the fuck it wants, rah rah America, but that is the experience that I had. In the other case, by the way, I did look it up. It was the mining of I'm not going to pronounce this. God.
It's okay. I believe you, like,
harbors
pronunciation sucks for me too, so I get it.
Yeah. So my bad on the pronunciation there.
You're good.
But all of this, I think, hopefully for the audience, demonstrates the crucial fact, which is that our compliance is completely conditional on whether we think it's in our best interests. And because it's completely conditional on that, the ought is not anything to do with international law. But even besides that, there's sometimes an incoherence to the question. Like, for example, I've heard a lot of people say that our actions regarding Venezuela violates international law. A lot of people think it doesn't. How do we know? Like, how do we know whether these actions violated international law?
Well, there seems to be a system in place where you can take it to court and find out, right?
What system?
Like, that's just how we do it. Like this statement that you made, I think you made it in your
No, wait, what system?
Hold on, can I finish?
What court would you go to? You said there's a system.
There's the ICJ, the International Criminal Justice
and if the ICJ rules against us, we're going to ignore it, right?
And we could also use our reason and ability. Yeah. A lot of people are dumb. A lot of people don't understand these things. But when there is a conflict, it's important that there are institutions available that people can go to and can resolve these conflicts, right?
And what
we can say, like,
are
hey,
those? The ICJ?
like for example, the ELSI case in 1989, the U.S. sued Italy, right, over the seizure of American-owned company Raytheon because they thought, okay, this violates international law. We were like, hey, this violates international law. This violates the treaties. Italy said, no, it doesn't. They had a relative disagreement about that. They took it before the ICJ. The ICJ ruled in favor of Italy, and the U.S. accepted the loss and dropped the matter, right? There are international bodies that exist that we can go to, like this idea that no one knows what international law is. Yes, they do. It's very clear. And when there are disputes, there are organizations that you can go to that can settle the dispute in the matter. It's just like we have in our legal system in America. It would be wild to say that no one knows what the law is just because there are disagreements on national law. There are a system in place that you are very familiar with as a lawyer where you go to resolve the disputes. And I'm going to quote directly here to say, and here, let me quote this directly, make sure I got it right. Blah, 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 blah. I wrote it down because I was just wild. We can't ever really know what international law is. I think that's one of the that's a wild statement to make.
So if China invaded Taiwan, would that violate international law in your opinion?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with international law enough to know. I'd have to go and look at
the
treaties and the statutes. It would probably go through the process.
Hold on, Wick. Just shut the fuck up for a second.
Jesus Christ, you can just let me answer the question. If you're going to ask me a question and you interrupt my answer, how can I ever answer the question?
Pardon me, gentlemen. Hold on.
Invading a foreign nation without a carve-out is a violation of Article 4 of the UN Charter, as we talked about earlier, and you seemed familiar with it back then, with certain carve-outs. So in your mind, in your heart, if China invades Taiwan, would that violate Article 4 of the UN Charter?
I don't know because I don't know the exact carve-outs of Article 4. I can't tell you. This is what happens when you continually interrupt me when I try to answer your question. What you're doing right now, you ask me a question, I'm trying to answer the question, but because you don't like my answer, you are continually interrupting me.
It's
because
a non-answer,
you know that
but go ahead.
My answer just doesn't work for your line of questioning. Like, you asked me a question, would it violate Article 4? I am not familiar enough with the carve-outs in Article 4 to let you know whether or not that would violate Article 4. I suspect probably, but I'm hesitant to make a definitive answer on that because I don't know. But luckily, we have a system in place where Wick is not the arbiter of whether or not it violated Article 4. There are other international bodies who specialize in this who can make the decision for me.
Which ones?
The ICJ is one of them. The UN is another.
Okay.
There are several.
So the ICJ requires consent of the parties to have a case. So China just refuses consent. The UN Security Council, China has a veto. So what body is deciding whether China violated international law?
The question you should be asking is what body is going to enforce the violation. That's what China has a veto in. If it is in the law that they have a veto, right, and can veto any UN Security Clearance Security Council decision, then they are acting within the law. Are they not?
So if China invades Taiwan, that does not violate international law.
It might not. It depends on the situation.
Okay. So
you are
when
asking
Russia
me a question
Ukraine,
that I'm telling you that there are
law?
Institutions that can answer the question, but I cannot because I'm
so when
not
Russia
familiar enough
Ukraine,
with the law
did
to
that
know.
Violate international law?
Say one more time.
When Russia invaded Ukraine, did that violate international law?
Probably, but you know why I know that? Because we had international bodies say so,
Which
such
ones?
as the ICJ.
There's an ICJ ruling on that?
I believe so, yes.
I'm not familiar with that. If there is, I'd love to look at it. But the security...
I could. There's a lot. It might be the ICC. It might be...
I would be very surprised if Russia consented to that, though of course they might have, and then they might do what we do where they just consent and then ignore it if they don't like the outcome, which we do sometimes. But I'd be surprised if they consented to that, deeply surprised. And of course there's no Security Council resolution on it, and the UN Security Council is the ultimate as you've mentioned, enforcement mechanism of international law in this area because Russia has a veto. So beyond the fact that the international law provides no ought, the other incoherent part of believing that international law, that we ought comply with international law, is that in many cases, as Wick has, I think, well articulated, the great powers can just put everything into a gray area. Did our actions with Venezuela and the boats violate international law? We'll never know because the U.S. is going to veto. Russia, Ukraine, Russia's going to veto. China, Taiwan, China's going to tell you it was always part of China. This is a domestic concern. No violation of international law. We will not submit to ICJ authority. We will veto in the Security Council. So what we're left with is people like you and me just saying from our armchairs, that looks like a violation of international law. And sure, shucks, maybe it does. But again, there's no ought there. International law just lets the great powers do as they wish to do, checked only by the other great powers.
Which we have designed, and it is in our interest that it is this way, because, as you say, we put it into these gray areas so that we can act in ways that smaller countries cannot. And thus, it is good for us, generally, to comply with the law that we have made. Because when countries stop complying with this law, right, as it's decided by the bodies that we have set up, the world is a worse place for it. We become weaker for it. Our non-compliance encourages and incentivizes other countries to not comply. The system breaks down. And when we fail to have a system in place at all, we get things like World War II, which devastated everyone.
I could bring forward, looks like the ICJ did do a few rulings on the Russia-Ukraine incident.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen those.
It says in March 2022, ICJ ordered Russia to immediately cease military operations and ensure any units and controls do not advance. And then there's another 2024 ruling on jurisdiction. And then between 2024 to 2026, there was a limitation of scope. And then some counterclaims in 2026. But I will bring forth an interesting piece here. It says on it's just AI overview on Google.
Sure.
It says, while the ruling is binding, it lacks direct enforcement mechanisms. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting piece to throw in there.
That's just real quick. Yes, the problem that I have with the UN and ICJ and things like that is enforcement is really, really hard. And we should change that. We should fix that. We should reform it so there is more teeth to these things. But that's not an argument against international law or compliance.
Well, but Wick, the reason that these things are the way they are isn't like accident. The reason these things have no teeth is we didn't want them to have teeth. That's why. We didn't want to be beholden to these organizations. We never want to be beholden to these organizations. Like the UN Security Council, the veto structure is set up so that the US doesn't have to worry about the UN riding roughshod over us. Like it was largely our idea. Like if you look at example after example after example, like even like the law of the sea treaty, there's an international seabed authority which rules on disputes over navigable waters and whose water is this and whose territory is this. The US, not a party. 169 countries are. Why aren't we a party? Because we don't want to have to care what the seabed authority says about where our water is and what water we can navigate. So again, the entire international order that we're talking about is set up specifically so that we can ignore it when we feel like it. And that's true of China and Russia as well.
But we know what the laws are because we have bodies that can make that determination. So again, when you say things like we can't ever know what international law is, it's just not true. Can you at least acknowledge that?
I think there are the times when you
I'll give you the enforcement shit, right? I'll just give you that it's hard to enforce these things, and that is partially by design. But you got to give me that you also know what these laws are.
Sometimes it depends on whether or not, like the body like the ICJ has jurisdiction.
Well,
it depends on whether the Security Council is actually going to pass a resolution.
We actually can enforce these things,
but for example, the UN General Authority, makes sweeping proclamations about what international law is and is not constantly that we completely ignore because we don't care what the UN General Assembly says. I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but I think they roundly condemned Israel and our support of Israel recently. This has impacted us not at all because we don't care what they think about this. We don't care. Like when I believe there was an ICC warrant for our allies in Israel about their actions in Palestine. Again, we just don't care. Like there's time. We don't care unless it's in our interest to care. And
that's my argument.
That's my argument. I think we
though.
agree, I think we agree on that. I just
like, to the extent that we comply, right? To the extent that we obey the rules that we set into place, to the extent that we follow our treaties, we follow our conventions, we are seen in a better light, which gives us more access to treaties, further treaties, which gives us more access to resources, which gives us more access to trade with other countries. And all of this benefits the U.S.
Okay, Wick, I think I can simplify this whole debate.
Go ahead, please.
Look, there's an international law that says X. It says X, right? Ought X. That's the law, right? It is, in this hypothetical scenario, it is 100% in the U.S.'s interest to ignore international law X. Should the U.S. ignore international law X in that scenario?
In a scenario where it's 100% in our interest to do so, yes.
Okay, so there's no ought there.
Hold on.
The ought is not coming from international law.
Let me hit you with another one. There is a international law that says ought Y. It turns out it is 100% in our interests to comply with Y. Should we comply with Y?
Yeah, of course.
Of course. So again,
but the
my
ought
argument,
is coming from
my
our
argument,
interest.
hold on, please. My argument is that there are more Ys than there are X's.
So then you would agree that if the situation changed and there were more X's than Y's, then we ought ignore international law most of the time.
I think so, yes, in that hypothetical, but I would argue that by the nature of what international law is, that there just will be more Y's than X's in general.
No, I think this is why I thought it would simplify the debate a little bit, because we can bandy all these examples about different rulings and whatnot. But I think ultimately we actually agree on what the situation is, which is that, you know, the U.S. ought comply with international law to the extent it is in our interests and not beyond that. So, you know, to me, I think that's why I would say, ought the U.S. comply with international law? No, because we have no obligation there. If you tell me there's an international law in place, that is not enough information for me to know whether we ought comply. What I want to know, and what will, I think, predict U.S. behavior, is what is in our interest. So if you gave me a fact pattern, I wouldn't know. If you just told me the law, I would not be able to tell you what the U.S. should do. What I would have to look at is what the U.S.'s interests are. That's where the ought comes from. And I don't actually think we disagree about that.
I think that where the disagreement comes is that I think that if I sight unseen am cited in international law, and you also tell me that the U.S. has ratified that law and signed off on that law, that my instinct would be to say, in a vacuum, not knowing anything else about it, that we should comply. And that if I apply this standard consistently, that I will be right more often, much more often in my opinion, than I would be wrong. And that this is a general heuristic to go about looking at what we should do in any international conflict situation, I think is a heuristic that leads to good outcomes, not just for the world, but for the U.S. And one of the reasons that I say this, my argument that showcases this, is that the U.S. has largely been the one who is the architect of these rules, right? There are two different types of interests as well. Well, there's probably more than that. But there are short-term interests and long-term interests. And there might be reasons in the short term it is not in our interest to comply with X or Y. But I would argue that in the long term, even if it hurts us short term, like it did when Italy nationalized Raytheon and we sued them over it, and I think I don't know the exact details of what they did to Raytheon, right? But they seized the American company Raytheon, and ICJ ruled in favor of Italy, right? Was that hurting us in the short term? Certainly. But did it help us long term? I argue that it did. And I argue that in most cases, that is the case. The times where I say we should violate international law, right, and I would agree that it is not in our interest to comply, is when the threat to U.S. is so great in the short term that it would override any long-term gains. And that is something that we have to look at a case-by-case basis. But I think that, in general, as a heuristic, I think that we should comply with international law because there are more Ys than X's, if that makes sense.
So I think one of the things that comes up often when we talk about international law is the idea of a rules-based international order.
Yes.
Right? We talk about, oh, there should be a rules-based international order. There should be a rules-based international order. And you've said a few times, it would be better if there was an enforcement mechanism. It would be better if this is true. But the obstacle to the creation of a rules-based international order is us. We are the obstacle to this. And by us, I include Russia and China. I think England and France might go along with it at this point because they're great powers in name only. But the great powers who were given veto power post-World War II, who consistently pick and choose what international law they will abide with. Smaller nations, the reason they ratify these treaties, you get 190 signatories on the Law of the Sea, on the Ottawa Treaty about landmines, that was 164, sorry, but a huge number, is because they kind of have to. Peer pressure is very powerful against these smaller nations. The consequences of violating international law are very different for them than it is for us. The reason that there's no enforcement mechanism that is in place that governs the US is because we don't want one. That's why Russia doesn't want one and China doesn't want one. We are the reason that this enforcement mechanism doesn't exist. So for us to kind of then say oh, we ought to comply with international law, when the truth is our entire position the entire time has always been, we're going to do what we want and you can't govern us. It seems a little bit silly. We honestly, we just reject these bodies' authority to rule over us unless we feel like going along for the ride.
But we generally feel like going along for the ride in many of these cases because we recognize that going along for the ride and setting a good example for the smaller countries and giving these smaller countries a way to resolve any conflict with us without force is in our interest to do so. And so it is in our interest to comply when we are ruled against in many cases, right? Because what is the alternative for these smaller countries?
Well,
Let me finish, right? Before this order existed, one of the only recourses smaller countries had was warfare, right? And that's why we had prior to the building of the international rules-based order, we had so many more wars. There were more deaths worldwide due to conflict, is because there was no other way to resolve these differences. All they had no one else to appeal to. If they had a problem, there was only really one way to solve it, or there was less ways to solve it than there are today. But today, we have international bodies that they can go to when they have these disputes that can head off this conflict and provides another way to have a conflict with the U.S. or a greater power and still, right, get their way some of the time. I think that's good for the world. It's good for us. One of the things I've enjoyed doing as a American citizen is traveling the world, right? Going to Europe, going to the Bahamas, going to Jamaica, go to New Mexico, and things like that. One of the reasons I can do that is because we have the international rules-based order that governs interactions and things like that. And I know that I'm, to some extent, protected, and the world is safer than it would be without it. And a safe world means I can travel places.
I think, one of the things that comes up in conversations like this that makes it a little bit tricky is that it's easy to generalize, and as you said, there's so many treaties. So if you think about where are we more or less compliant would be another interesting question. I would agree with you that we tend to be more compliant in economic treaties because we tend to think that free trade benefits us disproportionately because our economy is so strong. So generally, we're more willing to take a lump because even if we take a lump in the short term, in the long term, we tend to think that free trade inures to the U.S. benefit. That may be changing because of the way China has interacted with the international markets, but for now, that's been
well, also we've withdrawn from so many treaties too recently.
But if you look in like more military contexts, the way we treat international law is very, very different. Like we did, like the Geneva Convention, which is, the Geneva Conventions are about as hollowed as international law gets. I'd say the UN Charter and the Geneva Conventions are probably the most well-respected, most established,
well-known at least.
Yeah, and the ones that everyone talks about. And they reflect an era where irregular belligerents, terrorists, not people who are affiliated with states but don't respect the international order. They don't like terrorists. ISIS does not give our troops POW treatment. They torture and behead them. All of a sudden, the benefit that the U.S. gets from the Geneva Conventions, which is our soldiers will be treated well, and as a result, we are willing to treat other countries' soldiers well, is gone. The benefit to us is gone.
I disagree. And I'll tell you why.
In the context of terrorism. And then as a result, what did we do? Well, we did extraordinary rendition. We did Guantanamo Bay. We did enhanced interrogation. We did any number of things that most legal scholars would say violate the Geneva Conventions, though there's an optional protocol that we didn't join. And the reason that we did them is because we thought that it was no longer in our interest in this corner case to do so, because the terrorists were not giving us the benefit, the reciprocal benefit of international law in these disputes. And I think that the through line there runs where if you're looking at economic interests, we're more likely to comply. If we think that we should do something militarily and international law presents a barrier, we're almost certain to ignore it.
So I would argue that our failure to ignore, our failure to follow some of the Geneva Conventions has hurt us, not just internationally, but nationally as well, right? It's made us less respected as a power within our own country, not let alone internationally. Like the Geneva Convention's interesting because, again, in the 1940s, it was first ratified, but then in, I think, the 1970s, they had additional protocols that were put forward. We ratified, I think, one or two of them, and there was one or two
Many we did
not. Regardless, I think that one of the struggles that the Geneva Convention has had has been with these terrorist belligerents, right? This asymmetrical thing. But I would also argue that because we are more compliant, I won't say totally compliant, but we are more compliant with the Geneva Conventions, we're able to project our force better and we are trusted more in the world. We're better able to have bases in these countries and trade deals with these countries because we are more compliant. And to the extent that we have violated these things with Guantanamo Bay, what's the name for it? Like, it's torture by another name, in my opinion. Like
enhanced interrogation.
Yes, thank you. Enhanced interrogation, right? That has really hurt us in the world stage, and it has made it harder for us to exercise our soft power. I would argue that if we were to comply better with these Geneva Conventions in this instance, that it would help the U.S. overall. I don't think that we've gotten much from Guantanamo Bay militarily. I don't think we've gotten much from these extraordinary interrogation techniques.
But here's why we didn't. And the reason we didn't is the ticking clock hypo.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake, though, right?
Well, okay, but based on incomplete information, because neither you nor I can say which terrorist plots were foiled because of information that they recovered during enhanced interrogations. Neither of us can say that. We certainly don't fucking know. Like, we don't know. So what happens in these situations is, on one hand, you can say, oh, look, maybe this hurts us internationally, hurts our reputation.
I think it does.
On the other hand, we have no idea what the benefits were. But the argument, of course, was that if you have a terrorist in custody, you don't care about getting evidence that can be entered into a court. You're not worried about that. What you're worried about is there an attack coming? And the idea that the U.S. would let a terrorist attack happen because of the Geneva Conventions strikes me as strongly against the U.S.'s interests. So in the situation where you have what's that old show, 24?
Like, it was a great show.
Yeah.
No, it's fun, but it's fiction.
It's fiction, but when you have the ticking clock scenario, which is I think that where that came from, where that show based that on, then yeah, the U.S. will predictably ignore the Geneva Conventions, and I don't think it's wrong to do so. I think the ought is always our interest.
So I think, pragmatically, I don't think it's in our interest. I think that there's good data that extraordinary interrogation techniques do not provide reliable intelligence. We have good data on this. Does torture give us reliable intelligence? The answer is generally no. And we do that because there's always an argument. And look, it is an argument that is made, and it has to be respected, that under extreme conditions, right? Ticking clock, as you said, there's a nuclear bomb in one of the cities. You got to find out which city. The 24 was a great show from that because it's an interesting hypothetical, right? But in general, okay, for most of the time, that scenario doesn't exist and doesn't apply.
Okay.
And we have, unfortunately, expanded these interrogation techniques in Guantanamo Bay and other places in a way that I would argue I have not seen any material benefit from, but I have seen many material harm from. And I would argue, again, pragmatically, that just suggests to me, based on the data, that we should comply more than we do.
But you would agree, like, if you were in there's a bomb, it's going to go off in an hour, we've got a guy in custody.
Then do what you got to do.
The Convention is just not going to dictate your behavior in that situation.
Then do what you got to do, but these are not the general situations where I believe we use these techniques.
Okay. Yeah, and the other interesting thing about the terrorist examples is that why these things stopped. Like, we didn't stop, our enhanced interrogation program because of international law. We stopped because of domestic law. The Supreme Court told us we had to, right? Like a lot of the time, like, we didn't start granting habeas rights, or I think it was habeas rights, because of international laws, because the Supreme Court said we had an obligation under the Constitution. So, you can see the clear distinction between constitutional law that has a binding ought to it. Like, when you have a constitutional mandate, you clearly have a strong form ought. And international law, which is as long as it's in our interest, sure. But not when it's not.
You keep using this weird way of saying ought that I think it's kind of
that's what ought means. Ought means should.
No,
ought do it.
I know what it means, but you're saying the ought doesn't come from this place, so therefore this place doesn't matter. And I just disagree, because this ought points towards compliance with international law. Again, regardless, and I think this is honestly the core of the disagreement that we're having, is you think, and you can correct me if I'm getting you wrong here, right? Please do. That you think because we have sovereignty, right, and the ought comes from ourselves rather than international law itself, that international law itself isn't something that we should, that isn't the thing that we should be concerned about. But I'm arguing, right, that regardless of whether the ought comes from us, whether the ought comes from an outside force, whether the ought comes from God itself, right, like, it doesn't matter, that the ought exists, and therefore the ought points us in a direction, and we should follow that direction because it benefits us. Did I get that correct?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's an interesting example, right? Because I do think there are moral oughts that the United States has that are, more or less absolute. And international law just isn't one of them. Like, I think we have an obligation to secure the natural rights of our citizens. Like, it's in the Declaration of Independence. It's the purpose of our government. That's a moral ought. We ought do that, and we ought do it regardless of circumstance, right? International law is a convenience.
So if it was
it's an ought when it's convenient. It's not an ought when it's not convenient, which means it's not an ought. It's just it's a question of expediency.
So we have the ticking time bomb scenario. Only they're not a terrorist; they're a United States citizen. Okay. They planted a nuclear bomb in one of our cities, right? Mm-hmm. Do you violate their rights?
I'm not even sure their constitutional rights or their natural rights?
Yes, their constitutional, habeas corpus, all that, right?
Yeah, I would in that situation, but I was talking about natural rights, not constitutional rights.
Even though you think that the ought is stronger, and I might even agree with you that the ought is stronger than obeying our national laws, there are instances where you would say, no, the circumstances outweigh our ought on the national stage, and we ought do this anyway.
Yeah, the only unconditional oughts come from freestanding moral obligations. Like if you're religious, that you have a set of like absolute oughts. If you're a natural law enthusiast, you would have a set of oughts, though that's more of a optimization problem. So there's a little bit more leeway room there. The absolute oughts come from like a moral philosophy or a theological framework or something like that. The other oughts, what we're really talking about here is the interest of the country over and over again. And I think we agree on this. It's just whether it's in our interest or not, which is why I keep saying there's no ought there. And the reason is that it is in our interest or it isn't. And I think we more or less agree on this point. So I think it's
there's
really at this
daylight.
point.
There's less daylight between our positions than I think the people might think. But I think that it is an important distinction. And I think that it is important that it guides our decision making, because one of the things that we're doing right now as a country is we are withdrawing from a lot of these international treaties that we have ratified, that we are withdrawing from all sorts. I think people want to withdraw from the World Health Organization. I'm not sure if we have or not yet, right? We've withdrawn from the Climate Accord, the Paris Climate Accord, things like that. There's a bunch of these treaties that we have signed that we are, again, withdrawing from. There was about 66 recently that
But why ought we not do that?
Because I would argue, right, that the World Health Organization and following it and being a part of it and obeying its rules and regulations is in our interest. And I think that these other organizations, and I might even agree with one or two of them, like, come on, we probably should get out of these. But again, to my point as a whole, is that the reason this is an important distinction is because it does, again, point us to what we should do as a country when it comes to these institutions and organizations. Does complying with institutions that might, in the short term, hurt us, give us long-term benefit that outweighs the short-term hurt? And I would say that in many cases, yes, it would. There would be...
But it doesn't violate international law for us to withdraw from a treaty.
Sure. But when we talk about making international law stronger or changing international law, right? I think that does apply.
Yeah. So, but this is again like, so there's a treaty that we've ratified. The Paris Accords, right?
Sure.
Or I actually don't know if that had treaty status or not.
Yeah,
so I'm not sure that's a good example.
International agreements, things like that.
We might have a better example somewhere, but it doesn't really matter. There's an agreement. We've ratified it. We withdraw. There's nothing wrong with that from an international legal perspective. Like countries have the right to withdraw.
You could imagine scenarios where it would be wrong from a pragmatic perspective from America's interest.
It could be.
Yes.
It could be. But of course, the way we decide what's in our best interest is we elect people to do this work.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's how we decide. So
that's again why we should argue whether or not these things are in our interest or not, is because we do elect representatives who will represent our various opinions on the matter.
This is where it gets a little bit funny, right? Because it's like earlier you were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like if we didn't ratify a treaty, that wouldn't worry you. So it would work like there's a spectrum. The ones that we ratified, you think have the most ought. The ones that we haven't have less ought, and customary international law has like the least ought because we're not our word's not involved.
You're correct, because the pragmatic consequences of violating them are worse than ones we haven't seen. That's why.
So, but then of course, withdrawing from a treaty has
it's less bad than
just violating
it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's a spectrum.
So this is the thing, right? Like to the extent we shape what international law is, and as I think this come out in this conversation, in many cases, we're the final arbiter of what international law is as regards us because of the power that we wield.
That is unfortunately becoming less true.
Yeah. So I guess the question is like when if this might just boil down to politics then, right? Because if we're saying if we're saying, okay, it is in our interest to withdraw from this treaty or to ignore X international law thing or to not seek authorization from the UN, and you think it isn't and I think it is, and all we were saying is that pragmatics govern, then it's a question of our read on politics. is whether or not we follow international law. Like we would agree,
not just politics, but foreign policy, but it's all politics. Depends how you define politics. I'll just
but
grant it to you, sure.
that's why I was saying, that's why I took the negative, because I think that I honestly, I don't think there's a ton of daylight here. I think we agree on this. I think that the ultimate consideration is what's in our interest. When we get to the point where we're deciding to violate a law, international law, we know there's no binding enforcement other than the opinion of our peers and maybe the actions of other great nations. So we do what we think is in our best interest, and the people who make those decisions are the people that we elected to make those decisions. So, I mean, I guess what you're really saying is that there are situations in which you disagree with our government about what our best interest is.
Well, our current government, yes, 100%, right? Okay. But I think in general, again, the course of U.S. history, right? I agree more than I disagree with what the government has done. I think that our current situation is unique in many ways, and one of the reasons that I am against many of the things that Trump and the way he's conducting himself is because I think it's hurting our standing abroad. I would argue, and I know this is entirely another topic, so we won't get too much into the weeds here because I don't think either of us are prepared for this particular discussion. But I think that overall, our standing in the world is lower than it has been in my lifetime. I think we are weaker and less able to project power than we ever have in my lifetime. And I think that makes it us less able to enforce the international law that is good, right? That benefits us, because you have China and things coming in, and with the Belt and Road Initiative, they've recently made a alternative to the World Bank and the IMF and things like that. And because of we're less and less cooperative with these other countries, and they're less and less willing to deal with us, right? They're turning to other powers to shape what international law is. And that's not going to benefit us. It's going to hurt us.
And I think this is actually, I mean, and if you don't want to segue, please don't, but I almost think we kind of reached the end of the actual topic. So I'm happy to segue a little bit. I think that it's hard to talk about Trump because the way he speaks and the way he communicates makes it all a little bit muddy. But when I look at his foreign policy and I look at what's been happening internationally over the past 20 years, what I see is the emergence of China, the development of all these networks of soft power. That this has taken decades, Wick, but over time. And what China's doing is that they are using the levers of international law selectively. We do the same thing, so I'm not throwing moral shade, I guess, there, because we do the exact same thing selectively to benefit them and to hurt us. And what's happening is that the rules of the game are not as beneficial as they used to be for us, as China emerges as a true 1A, 1B scenario with us.
Certainly,
and
but
as that keeps happening, the instances in which we are going to choose to change the rules or violate the rules are going to increase, because pragmatically we no longer benefit from total hegemony the way we did in like the 90s.
But
that's just a different state of affairs.
But I would argue, and you're correct, this has been decades in the making. It's not just Trump, obviously, right? But I think one of the major kind of inflection points on this is our choosing to ignore international law and go into Iraq, depending on your definition of unilaterally. We had the coalition of the willing and all that, right? Like this and other like violations that we have decided to just ignore and to tear up treaties and to withdraw from agreements that we have made, has provided the space. It has left a void, basically, in leadership internationally that has been filled by China. It has emboldened them. It has made them a more attractive partner to work with than they were before, when we were compliant, when we were better following this international law, when we were more compliant with international law. And I would argue
I
that
disagree.
We disagree on this, but yes.
Well,
right?
no,
and I don't have like if we were coming in for this specific debate, I would have a whole host of other research, right? That I would have.
Yeah, of course. I understand. I guess like my assessment of the Chinese cause and effect question, let's call it, is that we had this idea that if we opened up trade with China and we gave them Big Macs, and we gave them, American blue jeans.
Nixon goes to China thing?
The Nixon idea that suddenly they would become a democracy and a friend and a good trade partner and all these things. And what China figured out is that they can just let American companies in when selectively, when they feel like it, steal all their intellectual property, all their trademarks, all their patents. Then, because the major Chinese companies are all controlled by the Chinese government, they just give the IP to their own companies, and then they close the borders to US companies. They figured out that they can manipulate their currency, and they can take advantage of trade deals as a result. And when the WTO rules against them, as they regularly do, China says, whatever. Because, like us, they're in a position as a great power that they don't have to comply with these things if they don't want to. And it's in their interest not to, so they don't. And as that started happening more and more and more, eventually you get into a situation where the US is playing a losing game because you're complying with rules and they're not. And so eventually you've got to reshuffle the deck. You've got to either change the rules or start ignoring more of them yourselves. And as that process continues to unfold, our response is going to be predictable based on the kind of the framework we agree with.
This is the trap that China has set, right? We see this short-term, certain losses that we're taking and gains that they're going, and we decided, and look, it's interesting because this is the same style of argument I have with Destiny and a few others on what we should do regarding MAGA, right? Because one party is violating the rules, we've decided, we need to violate the rules too. But what this has done internationally is it's made these third-party countries that are trying to decide whose influence and soft power should we accept, America's, China's, who can we trust more. It lessens the amount of daylight between China and the U.S. in these people's minds. And they're like, well, yeah, China's a little untrustworthy here. They violate these rules all the time, but so does America. So who the fuck cares? Why is there a real big difference here? There's not. I'll just go with one that's better deal. But when we were more compliant, right, and it was only China that was violating these rules and these deals and these things, we had much more leverage. We had much more power. We had much more ability to project soft power. One of the biggest self-owns of our generation has been the destruction of U.S. aid, right? That was set up for 40, 50, 60 years that we have used to kind of shape the narrative to spread American hegemony, right? Like both soft power and to an extent hard power, right? That has just been entirely dismantled under the current administration. And we are going to be seeing the effects of that for a long, long time. And I think that it is a shame that we took out basically one of the arrows in our quiver that we had in our battle against China. And because it is a battle, it is I don't know if I go so far as say a Cold War, right? But there is a rivalry there that is increasing in nature. I would argue that our ignoring soft power like we have done to kind of self-isolate is going to hurt us in the long run.
Well, actually, I think the greatest blow that we've struck against China in this, like, again, Cold War might be a little dramatic, but like this escalating tension, let's say, has been arguably the violations of international law from the Trump administration. Taking out Venezuela, taking out Iran, there's a direct line between destroying those countries' ability to provide China with, I think it's 35% of its oil, and it's the biggest oil importer in the world. And the U.S. attempts to fend off Chinese interests geopolitically, like that. There's an obvious strategic through line in taking out China's kind of vassal states in order to promote our interests. So I mean, but I do think this is what we're going to end up seeing. Like I think that there will be ultimately, we will not be able to defend the U.S. petrodollar forever. I don't know if the fans of this are familiar with that, so I don't want to go into a tangent unless I have to, but I don't think we will be able to defend it forever. BRICS will continue to grow. China will continue to grow. We are going to have to realign our economy and have other interests to protect. I'm not even a tariff guy, but I think that when I look at Trump's foreign policy and I see him attacking Chinese vassal states and then trying to relocate the economy within the borders. What I see is somebody who sees this problem on the horizon and is trying to do something about it.
So one of the interesting is it's ironic you bring up the petrodollar. One of the things that Iran is doing right now, after they've pretty much closed the Strait of Hormuz, right? Which is, it was interesting to see Trump say that it was fine and in great shape, and in the background, a ship's on fire because Iran had blown it up. It was just their mostly peaceful protest moments, I guess, right? As the same kind of dichotomy there. One of the things that Iran is doing is it's going to let oil ships through as long as they trade in yen or not American money.
Yeah.
And so Trump's invasion
and then we
of
will
Iran,
kill
just
them.
let me finish real quick. Trump's invasion of Iran has not only not hurt China, it might even help it. It's too soon to say. And also it's helped Russia because we ended up, because of the oil situation, we took away for 30 days, at least so far, our sanctions against Russian oil, which has allowed them to refill their coffers, to sell at much better prices worldwide, and has absolutely been a boon to Putin and his war economy. And this is short term. In the long term, it might change, but in the short term, this is definitely not hurt China and Russia. Now, Venezuela, I would agree with you.
Oh, it would certainly. But Russia, I think, it's a different category. China lost a huge percentage of its oil, but we are going to, I would predict, simply kill the Iranian leaders who are taking this position on the petro-yuan. I think we're going to keep killing them until they agree to something different. Like that seems to be what the end goal here is, to the extent that you can ascertain it. The situation with Russia is an interesting one.
That's interesting that because you say the extent you can ascertain it.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, I think be honest about it. But the thing with Russia that's interesting, because you're right, we did loosen the sanctions, but it's a little bit tricky, right? Because when we cut off 35% of China's oil, where were they going to buy it? Where were they going to make up that 35%? They're going to buy it from Russia. So in some senses, loosening the sanctions on Russia is making a decision between who do you want to hurt. The oil's going to go to somewhere. So Russia's going to get to sell the oil. They're going to either sell it to China or sell it to someone else. We're trying to make it incentivize them not to sell it to China, which is like one of the reasons to lift those sanctions in this situation, because we ultimately, if we cut off 35% of China's oil and then they just start buying it from Russia, Russia is still filling up its coffers either way.
I mean, they're already buying it from Russia. They were buying it.
They just buy more.
But yes, they get to charge more now. So you're correct in that sense that there's always trade-offs and costs. But when the Iran conflict in general, like Venezuela's a different situation. Venezuela's a whole different beast. And I think we might even agree on the Venezuelan situation, right? Where it did put a real hurting on what's his face, on China and Putin. I think it did to an extent. Iran, though, is a different beast. We are sending 5,000 Marines to Iran right now, or to the region, I should say. If we get bogged down in an Iraq style or an Afghanistan style kind of boots on the ground slugfest, which I would argue is inevitable if we want to achieve the goal that you laid out of just keep killing these guys who are in their leadership, right? We got a bunch of them, but they've changed their patterns. They've changed their behaviors because they're not stupid, right? And it's become harder and harder and harder to target their leadership. And eventually we're going to get to a point where we have to have human resources on the ground to deal with these things. We can't just do it from the air, right? We can't bomb them into regime change. Now, we could argue whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. Should we do it? Should we not do it? It's a question. But I don't know if that's going to help us on the world stage, man.
Well, but what's fascinating about all this...
I just want to let you know, let's wrap up in about 10 minutes, and then we'll move into open panel.
Sure.
I'm enjoying the discussion, though, so please keep going.
But I mean, and that's the thing, right? Ultimately, whether or not this Iran situation is a good or bad thing for us is going to turn on execution. Like, how well did we do it? How well did we achieve the various metrics and objectives, et cetera, et cetera? It's going to turn on how good we are at winning this war. That's really what it turns on. What it doesn't turn on is, and I think we both agree on this, so it's not trying to do as a gotcha. it just doesn't turn on whether or not it was a legal use of force internationally, right? Like the question is, we felt like we needed to do it. Now the question is, do we do a good job doing it? And the disagreements, to the extent we have them, are going to be about whether this was pragmatically in our interest to do. But like, I think you and I would agree that whether or not it violates international law to bomb Iran had like very little to do with the calculus, other than like maybe
I think
we're like, what if our allies are pissed off? I don't know.
I think it should have had more to do with the calculus at hand than it did. Now Iran obviously decided to go crazy and just bomb all the nations in the region, right? Like Omar and the UAE and all these places, just throw them everywhere, right? Which kind of complicates matters. But to bring it back, I guess, to the theme of the debate here, is I would argue that if we had done the process differently when it came to Iran and going into Iran, and we had brought it forth differently, and at least made the attempt to go through the UN Security Council and things like that, and to maybe get more people on board, and to, hell, sell it to the American people more, I think that we would have more staying power in the region. Because in order for Iran to win here, it doesn't have to beat us militarily, right? We understand that. It doesn't have to win the military conflict. It just has to drag it out enough and cause enough economic pain and suffering, right? And cause us to lose enough face for us to nationally get tired of it and stop, which it is more likely to do because we went in there regardless of international norms, laws, and all these things, and we just decided to do it by fiat.
No, I mean, I think that the truth is, the reason that we have, like, we're kind of inventing this new doctrine of like the micro war, which is like the Venezuelan model. Now, obviously, Iran's a different beast than Venezuela, but like, I think the reason is that like we've reached a point in our democracy where, for a variety of reasons, and you want to talk about different debate. This is really a different debate. People.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Oman, not Omar. I whoopsied. Sorry, my bad.
All good. Continue. People have lost their stomach for prolonged conflict. Like I think we have to win incredibly decisively and quickly for the American electorate to be on board right now. I think that like the anti-war crowd, like we're in a moment of populism, and anti-intervention is the one thing the populists on the left and the populists on the right, sorry, Israel's the one thing, but this is the second thing that the populists on the left and the populists on the right agree on, is an isolationist approach. So, you know, it's weird because, like, yeah, I think on one hand, Iran's win condition is survival, but the other win condition is propaganda, right? Like their other win condition is just to propagandize the US people and to convince us that we are in this very terrible situation, that it's all going badly, and that we ought give up. And that's actually, you know, their model for victory right now. So, you know, I think that unfortunately we'll see what we're made of as a country. Well, but there are some things that are worth fighting for.
There was an interesting exchange after when the Vietnam War was being wound down and we were withdrawing, and there was a meeting between the leaders of the Viet Cong and the American military. And the American military general at the time, I forget his name, said to the Viet Cong leader, he says, you know, you never won a single battle against us. You never won a single engagement on the ground, right? And he's like, yeah, you're right, but that's irrelevant. And that's true here, right? They don't have to win a single engagement. Kind of irrelevant how these things are. Yes, I would agree with you, propaganda matters, but one of the things that makes their propaganda stronger is, again, us going in by fiat and not doing it through the international rules-based order. One of the things that has made populism stronger in the U.S., both on the left and on the right, and us being very anti-interventionist, which I think we are in this country, was the failures of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, and the fact that they drug out for so long. And in the case of Iraq specifically, the people feel that they were lied to. And they were, right?
What was the benefit, Wick, of ignoring the UN process in the Iran conflict? Because there was a pretty clear one.
What the benefit would be that we could strike with impunity, right? Like that we didn't have to get permission from any other country. We could just go in and
and that they had like 100 of their leadership in the same place at the same time that we could kill in one day on the first day of the conflict, which they wouldn't have done if we had gone to the UN and said, "Hey, UN, we're thinking of intervening in Iran. Please don't tell them."
Hold on.
God, I hope this doesn't leak.
Do you think that these people who were in that room didn't think we were thinking of intervening, like that we had to go to the UN for them to realize that we were about to strike them? We had known we were going into Iran for months. This has been something we've known for months. It was just when we were going to do it. And I don't think that calculus changes if we go to the UN first. They would still not know when we were going to strike.
And secret action until it happened. And there's a reason
hold on,
why, when we notify Congress, you only call in the Gang of 8. I think it was the Gang of 7 in this instance, because we're so afraid of leaks. And if we're afraid of leaks from our own government, we're certainly afraid of leaks from the UN.
Are you
where
under
like
the impression,
like that fucking bed of snakes? There's all kinds.
Are you
of
under
people
the
in
impression
UN
though that
who would
we go
happily
in
leak this
to the Iran or to the UN Security Council and says we're going to strike at this day at this time? Do you think that's what we do?
I mean, I think if we go in and we say we would like to use, well, let's put it this way. We go in and we say we would like to use force to strike Iran. Now we've put them on notice of our plan. And what is the upside we get for doing it?
What we get
China
is we
vetoes
can show,
instantly.
Hold on.
Like,
sure,
I mean, like, what?
But
like,
then
what,
we can show, right? There's a reason that even if you know you're going to be told no, that you still ask in certain situations. And so you could say, hey, I tried to do this the right way. I tried to go through the international rules-based order we had. We tried to do it correctly, but we have belligerents like China, like Russia, stopping us. And if it weren't for them, we would have been able to do this correctly. There is propaganda benefit to that. And again, you have to answer this question. Did they not know we were going to strike because we didn't go to the UN? They've known, again, for months. They prepared for months.
One of two things are true. Either we did catch them unawares, even if they thought tensions were escalating, or they are the dumbest motherfuckers who have ever lived. Now, I'm open to suggestion that they are the dumbest motherfuckers who ever lived. But if you look at like Saddam Hussein, that guy had 13 body doubles that were moving around the country at all times because he was so worried that the US was going to kill him that he had like this huge operational veil of secrecy in an attempt to protect him. And these guys gathered 100 people, the whole leadership structure in one place. And when they thought we were about to strike them, I mean, I'm open to the suggestion that these were the dumbest motherfuckers who ever lived, but it's one or the other.
I think
they were surprised or they are retarded.
Have you ever been in a state of high stress for a prolonged period? There comes a time when that makes you make mistakes. These people have been known that they were going to be struck at some time, at some point, by Israel and the U.S. They knew that that was coming. They've known for months. This is a high-stress situation where they're sitting there, they're waiting. As someone who, again, you'll talk to veterans, and the hardest part is waiting, is knowing it's happening, it's going to happen, but you don't know when, and you're in this constant state of heightened stress, heightened readiness, okay? So after a period of months of doing that, you know that, hey, okay, we can only keep up these security measures for so long before it takes a toll. And that just happens overall. But that has nothing to do with whether or not we go to the UN first or not, because either way, they knew it was coming. They just didn't know when.
Okay, Wick, if gathering your entire leadership structure into a single room so that you can all be obliterated by strikes is not an indicator that you didn't know this was coming, what would be an indicator that you didn't know this was coming? Because it's hard for me to imagine a behavior that is more indicative of not knowing you're about to be struck than putting your entire command structure in one place. Even in the US, we always have like,
a designated survivor?
We always have the one guy who we send out of the room, right? Like this.
Well, this is why the Iran regime hasn't collapsed, is because they did the goddamn same thing.
I mean,
they did the same thing.
Oh, wait, what would an indicator of surprise look like if this was not an indicator of surprise?
You can understand that you can still have the element of surprise even though you know something is coming eventually, but not knowing when or how or where. And going to the UN doesn't give away the when or how or where. And again, they knew, obviously, that it was coming.
I mean, so what you have is you go to the UN and there is a risk of operational security. Maybe it's not a big risk. That seems to be what you're saying. Maybe you don't think it's a big risk.
I don't think, I'm just curious, what do you think the risk is specifically?
Well, I obviously think they were surprised, Wick. I obviously think that we caught them off guard when we did this. I think they thought that there was going to be more of a slow buildup, that we weren't going to take such dramatic action, that it might be something like a more isolated response. Obviously, I think they were surprised by what we did.
I knew it was coming. I had panels weeks in advance about the subject.
But
if they didn't know it was coming, maybe they are stupid because I knew it was coming.
They do seem pretty stupid.
Privy to
but then, so on the one hand, you have a risk of operational security, maybe a big risk, maybe a small risk. Let's grant it small for the sake of argument. On the pro side of going to the UN, you have giving China the opportunity to veto you. It's just kind of like
I would argue
that the pros are so minor that it's like, well, why take any risk?
Someone stopped you from doing a thing, and otherwise you would do it the right way. Is a propaganda benefit. It helps us propaganda wise. I think that's a benefit to our mission in that statement.
Gentlemen, would we like?
No, you're fine. You can do closings now.
Yeah. Also, Sarah, I know just as a matter of bookkeeping, I assume that like super chats and stuff have been coming in. I have not been able to keep track of them on my side. Hopefully we get a chance to read them at the end because I know people have been generous.
They show up. I see your memberships. I don't think I saw any other like regulars outside of just memberships.
Oh, okay. I see. I can see them in the starred column, and I think Wick's yours are not.
I don't.
You're streaming on different software. Okay, got
it. He doesn't
okay.
share with others. Sorry. He doesn't.
Well, as
it's just how I do.
As the great editor Black Elk once told me, there are OBS people and there are StreamYard people. Ryan, you're StreamYard people. So here we are.
I like StreamYard. It's plug and play. It's much easier. But the OBS people are all right too.
Look, honestly, it's what I used first, and that's the only reason. That's it. This is what I was used first. That's it.
Hand to God. When you have a system that works, you're like never changing. I use this. I have a third software that I run, which it just runs a virtual camera. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but I'm not touching it. No changes. Like it's fragile. It works now. No changes.
Yeah. StreamYard is what I first started with. And then I tried to play with OBS and I got incredibly frustrated. And I didn't even care to go any further than what the hell is building a scene. All right, gentlemen, let's go ahead. If you are paying attention, I've already dropped the open panel link into the live chats. If you would like to join open panel, now is the time to go ahead and start heading backstage. First 7 people back there with cams on will have priority to the panel for the Q&A. And then after that, anybody can be thrown up and down and over and around through that. So start making your way back now. All right, Ryan, if you'd like to begin with your closing statement, please.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah, for having me on as always. Thanks, Wick, for the fun debate. Before I do this, because I don't want to forget, and I forget when I'm on other people's shows, Brazuf so generous with memberships, Blasterbot, Grassroots, Hegemon, really appreciate you guys. Thank you for the support. It really helps grow the channel. Thank you guys. Love you. Thanks for the support. This is an interesting debate where we came for debate and a discussion broke out because I don't actually think that there's a huge degree of difference between our ultimate positions on the subject of the debate, which is ought America comply with international law? And I think in example after example, and we did it with the hypothetical treaties. If X is not in our interest, but it is international law, ought we comply with international law? We both agree no. If it is in our interest, should we comply? We both agree yes. So ultimately, what you, the viewer, are left to decide is between two competing hypotheses, which I'm not even sure are deeply competing. What I was pointing out was that there's no moral ought that comes from international law itself. The U.S. has never thought there was. What the U.S. has thought there was a benefit to the United States. And so the U.S. set up international law to accrue largely to its own benefit. And for many years post-World War II, it did. Now, that situation is starting to change. And as that situation starts to change, the United States has stopped abiding by international law to the same extent, though it never really abided by international law universally. It always was picking its favorites. It always selected the treaties. It was always reluctant to give up its sovereignty. It was always willing to ignore the ICJ when it was convenient to ignore the ICJ, and follow the ICJ or the WTO when it was convenient to do so. But what we are seeing now is that the international order and the geopolitical order is changing. And the important part for me about, and the reason I was interested in having this discussion, is that as these things change, you're going to hear people come up and say, X, Y, and Z is a violation of international law. It's a violation of international law, with the implication being the US ought not do this thing because they're saying it's a violation of international law. This has a few problems, and it's problems that you, the viewer, should be aware of. The first is even gross violations of international law, like China invading Taiwan. Almost every legal scholar would say that violates international law. There is no enforcement mechanism. The Security Council will veto in the Security Council. International law simply does not restrict great powers in this way. And most countries take what's called legal positivism into account. The law is what is enforced, not what the law is aspirationally. That's how China looks at it. That's how Russia looks at it. The problem is, as the US tries to secure its interests in an uncertain future, with our adversaries gaining in strength, we are going to have to make decisions about what is in our best interest. And sometimes that is going to be about maintaining international law and maintaining certain systems and complying in free trade and a number of other wonderful things. And other times it's going to involve ignoring international law or withdrawing from treaties that we have been a member of for a long, sometimes even for a long time. And when that happens, the through line will always be the same. What is the US interest? So when people throw at you, XYZ violates international law, the question you should ask yourself is not, oh, ought America not do that because international law forbids it? The question that you must ask yourself, and I think that Wick and I agree on this, despite the fun that we had disagreeing about other various things tonight, is it in the US's interest to ignore international law in this specific way? And you can make that calculation taking geopolitical reputation into account. You can weigh security. There's all kinds of pros and cons. The calculus has to be decided. It is never going to come out the same way. It is fact specific. But the one thing that is not fact specific is whether or not international law provides the ought. It does not provide the ought. What provides the ought is US interests. It tried it in 1940s, in 1990s, today, forever. That's what we ought consider first and foremost. International law is a factor. It's a fact that goes into determining what is the US's best interest. But ought we follow international law? Only when it benefits us.
Thank you, Ryan. And Wick, to you for your closing statement, please.
Certainly. Well, yes, thank you for having me. I do appreciate it. And I do appreciate always a spirited discussion. It's really fun. I do think it's hiding the ball a little bit when you say that the only consideration should be, is it in our interests? And while that is technically true, I think that you also kind of hinted at this in your closing statement, that there are not just short-term interests, but long-term interests at play. There are plenty of times where we have taken a hit to our short-term interests because we believe as a country, and I think we correctly do so, that it is in our long-term interests to comply with these things, even if sometimes in the short term we may take a hit. And I think I provided several examples where we have complied with the ICJ and other international bodies, even when it has ruled against us. I think that one of the things that we have to understand is it's a cart versus a horse situation in how international law is being less, has less teeth in today than it did back when we went into the Balkans, basically. When Clinton went into Yugoslavia and we had a whole court try the leader of Yugoslavia for war crimes. That was a success of international law. We were able to do it as an international community. We had teeth. As we have gone on and through the years, we have complied with international law less and less. This has emboldened other nations to also not comply with international law, and it has made it harder to enforce international law because we've been able to, other countries have been able to, like, well, if the U.S. isn't going to do it, why should we? Look, I don't think morality comes from law at all, whether that be national law, international law. I don't think you should get your morality from words on a book, right? In a court or otherwise. I think morality comes from other places, which we won't get into here. But regardless of where the ought comes from, I think the ought exists. I think in general, primarily, it is in the U.S.'s interest, even when the other side doesn't obey international law, to still comply with international law, because this isn't just a two-party thing where one side's not complying and one side is complying. There are observers. There are third parties, dozens of them, smaller countries, where we are vying with Russia, with China for influence. And they want to, because it is in their interest, to deal with trustworthy partners, right? They want to go with the partner that is more trustworthy. And if we demonstrate that we are more trustworthy than China or Russia, then I think that they are more likely to engage with us through trade, through soft power, through hard power, by allowing us to establish bases, to refuel at their ports, to rearm and rest at various places our troops and things like that, and project our power. And I think that complying with international law is one way we do that. Ryan is correct when he says that there are multiple things that we have to measure, and that it is a fact-based decision. Like I said, I don't think that every single law ever that's ever been made should always be obeyed, no matter what, no matter the circumstances, no matter the context. He's correct in that. But where I think our disagreement lies is how often and to what extent international law affects our interests and our compliance with it affects our interests. I think that our obeying international law is in our long-term interests. He's also correct when you just shouldn't take the word of a Twitter shitter on whether or not something violates international law or not. Why would you ever do that? But you shouldn't do that for anything ever. Like if they say, well, this breaks the national law, just ignore them too. There's institutions that decide these things. In the case of national law, it's the courts. It's not Twitter. In the case of international law, there are various institutions depending on what section of international law you're looking at, whether it be economic, criminal, etc. Yeah, in the end, I think that there is less daylight than I thought there would be between our opinions. But I also would say that I did have the stronger argument, and I'm prettier. So there you go. No, thank you for having me. I love you guys, and that's me. Wick out.
Thank you to both of you. I'm kind of curious. I know we'll get to the super chats here in a second. Sure. If you want to join Open Panel, the link is pinned, or it is running through the live chat right now. But like, where do we draw this line on when we get to say, nope, it's our best interest if we do or if we don't, right? And how do we know if that line is going to stay consistent?
It's a judgment. This is the problem. This is why I was saying it's ultimately politics, is that it's a judgment call, right? Like, when we got China to join the WTO, or maybe let's not say we got, China joined the WTO after not being a member for a long time. The initial view was, oh my God, this wonderful thing. China's going to be bound by international law on economics. And suddenly this is going to be a fair thing. And then it turns out, yes, China got a huge economic boon from this. They got massive investment. There was a huge wave of money going into China around 2000, 2001, I think, if I recall correctly, when this happened. I might be wrong on the date, but I think it's around 2001. But then as China started manipulating its currency, stealing intellectual property, all the using its state apparatus and industrial espionage to take advantage of people, and EU and the US would bring case after case against China in the WTO, and China would tell us to fuck ourselves. They would lose, but then they tell us to fuck ourselves. So what you start seeing is, oh shit, this rules-based order isn't really doing what we think it's going to do. And then the question is, what do you do about it? Right now,
where's the enforcement arm at?
I will say there was an international law attempt to remedy this harm. It was the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership.
Yes,
the idea
Trump
was
got
that
us out of.
we were going to create leverage over China by forming trade alliances with all of its allies and then force China to comply, and it couldn't get membership in this critical arrangement unless it did. But we'll never know, because it was destroyed by a wave of populism and universally decried on both the left and the right. There's one thing that Hillary and Trump agreed on, even though Hillary was instrumental in drafting the fucker. But by the end of the campaign,
that was one of the stupidest decisions I think Clinton ever did, was to decry this thing. The Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership was great. It would have solved this problem. So I think I agree with you here, Ryan, that the solution to violations of international law is enforcement of international law through. Well,
it was a creative solution, and I'm a little biased towards it because I was studying law I was doing a semester abroad, so I was in the EU and I was taking a clinic on EU law, and one of my professors was involved in drafting it, so I was in the weeds with the people.
You were rah. Okay.
Yeah, it was like a thing we were studying. So at the time, we were all on board with it. But it's going to be one of history's great what ifs, right? Because the counter argument is that, so now you have one more agreement that China can selectively ignore and take advantage of and fuck you over in. Would that make a difference? But on the flip side, I don't know. It might have. It really could. It could have been the tipping point.
Yeah, one of the mistakes I think people made is that people like Russia, China, etc. can violate the rules with abandon, and there is no consequence. There absolutely are consequences to violating the law. China, for example, since they started, when they initially joined the WTO, they did get a huge influx of economic investment. People trusted them more, etc.
Huge amount of money, yeah.
They're stagnating now because they've proven to be an untrustworthy ally, right? They're having huge economic issues, in large part because they've proven to be an unworthy actor, right? Like an untrustworthy actor. So it's the same argument I have with people on the left who say, Trump's just able to do whatever he wants and there's no consequences ever. No, he's getting stymied constantly, right? And look at the polling. He's going to effectively lose power in the midterms. It's going to be a bloodbath, right? He's going to lose definitely the House, maybe even the Senate now. And that's going to really hurt his ability to govern. So the idea that China and Russia are suffering no consequences for violating the international law is just not true.
Well, it's not that they're not suffering consequences, it's that they've already banked these tremendous benefits. Like, a lot of their growth was because of their violations of international law. And the truth is, and this is tough for me because, as you know, Wick, I'm not like a tariff guy. This is not an area where I'm a fan of. I think selective tariffs have a place in international policy and geopolitical relations, but my general position is on a blank slate, I'm opposed. But the truth is, money will flow into China if they're willing to pay companies, and then they'll just do this bullshit all over again. So whether through force of arms or some other geopolitical force, America does need to reconcile itself to the fact that China is at most the 1B to our 1A and are ascendant in the way that they're arranging geopolitics against us. And we have to do something about it. We can't let China develop huge alliances, in particular regional alliances, in our hemisphere, on our shores, against us.
Yeah, but the answer to that, and I know we could, this is a whole nother
we'll move
debate.
on
The
after
answer
this.
to that, right, is further showing that we are a more trustworthy trade partner, a more trustworthy ally, a more trustworthy someone to work with and to make international law treaties with than China is. And to the extent that we also violate international law, it hurts us in that goal. It hurts our answer. And so I think that the disagreement we have here is what ought we do about this situation that we both agree exists.
But another way to go about solving that is to say, if you align with our enemies, we will kill you. And when we kill you, China will do nothing about it.
But that makes us more, or I'm sorry, that makes us less safe worldwide. It puts our servicemen in unnecessary danger when there is another solution that I think was even more effective in, again, using multilateral agreements, international law, and building treaties and partnerships like the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Yeah, the great what if.
Right?
I think that's a point you only have to prove once, though, Wick.
Like, what do you mean?
If they do this, like, we will kill you, XYZ, right? Like, that's a point you only have to prove once.
I wish that were true, but I think that the continual conflict between us and terrorists and also Iran has proven that to be not the case. We have bombed Iran before, like we've struck at Iran's stuff before. We killed one of their generals, right? We've currently bombed the shit out of them now. They're not surrendering. They're still going.
Yeah.
Like, do we have to just prove it once? We bombed the shit out of Afghanistan. We bombed the shit out of Iraq. We bombed the shit out of tons of countries. We went into Yugoslavia and we took them out because they disobeyed. But
one of the issues on the geopolitical stage, and I think, Wilk, you've articulated it well, so I don't need to rehash it, is global reputation and cooperation, and that is an aspect of strength. Another aspect of strength is actually having a reputation for carrying a big stick. And I think that one thing that happened with the U.S. post Iraq is that we kind of got a reputation for not being quite as willing to pull the trigger, particularly with like Obama and Syria and the red line there.
I would like, one of the biggest failures of Obama is his failure to enforce the Syrian red line, as well as the
Crimea invasion,
the Crimea shit. Yeah.
No, I mean,
so no, on this we agree, and that's Look, I'm not a pacifist. Okay?
Yeah, in some situations, you just need. I think part of this is you just need to restore. Like when Trump was on Joe Rogan, you know how much Trump hates John Bolton? He just fucking hates John Bolton.
Yeah.
But he said something really nice about John Bolton on Joe Rogan that always stuck with me, where he was just shit talking the guy. He was just shit talking the guy constantly. I hate this motherfucker, blah, all the stuff he said about John Bolton. But then he's like, there was one good thing about John Bolton. If I was meeting with a country like in the Middle East or something, and I was like, if you don't do X, I'm going to bomb the shit out of you. They'd look over my shoulder and see John Bolton, and they would assume I was deadly serious about bombing them. Because John Bolton had such a reputation as a warmonger that like no one in their right mind could take that threat less than seriously. And I do think that we needed to restore our reputation for lethality when things aren't going the way we want it to go.
Well,
I do think
we needed a backbone.
Yeah,
we needed the backbone.
Now, hopefully, I think, Wick, you and I would agree that hopefully once that's restored, we don't have to do it as often. But I do think that, like Venezuela was getting real cute. Like we were really signaling like, holy shit, something might happen for a long time. We're striking their boat. And they didn't really seem like they were getting the message. And I think that countries are going to be a little bit less willing to tell us to fuck ourselves.
Look, Biden bombed the shit out of the Houthis, right? And we've bombed the shit out of other countries before under democratic leaderships. Like the idea that we don't have a spine, I think is a little overblown. I would agree with you in the case of Obama, at least when it comes to Syria and when it comes to the Crimea situation. But I would disagree overall that we haven't shown a readiness to use lethal force. In fact, during the
and we'll wrap this up from here. And
during the run up to the 2025 elections, even Kamala Harris was saying we need to be a more lethal military. I think that what Trump does give in lethality, he loses in trust because no one understands exactly when he's going to change his mind. And he seems like to be a slave to public opinion in a way that other leaders just were not. And I think that we can see this with the Iran stuff. I don't know if he even has an end goal here, and it's going to be when he feels like, when he gets bored of it.
Well,
and that's a real problem for me.
Trump is very, very tough to read. Every time I've thought I knew what he was thinking, I've been wrong more often than I've been right. So I try not to get into like predictions in that way. But all I'll say about that, and I know, Sarah, you want to move on, is that like one of the things that we often do that I think is a mistake in this era of modern war is we say, like, we'll go into a country and be like, victory is when we win in exactly 2 weeks. More than 2 weeks is a crushing defeat on America's part. And then the other country goes, oh shit, so we just need to last 2 weeks? And then they know exactly what to propagandize. I think we give them targets for asymmetrical retaliation because they're trying to win a war of, as I think we agreed, terrorist reprisals, propaganda, and cockroach survival. And being a little bit ambiguous about what your goals are actually makes that a little bit harder. It might make it harder to sell it to the American people, but as a strategy, I think it's worth trying, to be honest with you.
I do have to use the restroom and get something real quick. So I'm gonna
Yep, no problem. I don't have any questions on the front nose. Yep, no problem. How do you say his name?
Rizzuto.
Well, he sent out a wonderful 10 memberships for the Ryanators over there. Spin City, who is hanging out backstage, ready to come up. He was first one backstage. I know he's been probably screaming from the chat. Sends in a big 10, says Libtardia within the first 5 minutes. I think that was shots fired to Wick during his opening statements. Simon Hectic sending a big 5, says, go Sarah, great subject. It was. I was really excited. That's why I reached out to you on this one, Ryan, because I feel like the international law kind of needs to be debunked almost. In like I was noticing in this space, a lot of people kept saying international law, international. It's like, but is it, or do we have to, you know? John sending in the big 5 says, I know Tomato is going to take this as said because I gave you money, but it's not my money I'm using, LOL, but your show still sucks. Okay. And then he also sends in another 10 to say more of her money because Toasty Man Bad said so. Fair enough.
I support you donating, but you may be drunk.
Very, very true. Caledonian says at the big 5, international law is the legal corollary of game theory. Once you throw out the rules, victory favors the most irrational and brutal. Any thoughts to that?
I mean, I think what international law is like very, very soft rules of the game. It's always going to exist. We had the Treaty of Westphalia before we had modern international law. It's not a question of whether international law will exist or will be thrown out. It's a question of what the new rules are, right? So I think Wick and I agree on this also. There's the honest question is whether the current rules favor the U.S. sufficient that we ought maintain them. Because if they don't, then we should set up new rules.
Yeah, that's kind of the pondering I have in that instance of if the rules apply, but there is no enforcement arm, then are they really rules anyways? And if so, why are we operating under that level? I mean, it's only really to the people who don't have the enforcement to not, like, who can't afford to not follow them.
Yeah. When I was in law school, I was in law school when Russia invaded Crimea. And I was actually taking international law. So we had a Russian legal professor came in and gave a lecture, and he was explaining the Russian view of law, which is legal positivism, which is exactly what you just said, Sarah. Like, the question is not what does the document say? It's what is the enforcement mechanism? And it's tricky because I'm not insensitive to Wick's argument where it's like, if China's taking that positive position and Russia's taking the positive position, maybe the US can win through soft power if it doesn't take the positive position. But then we have the problem of the fact that Russia and China were both asserting their power and ascending during this time period. So, and that's why the TPP is the great what if, because whatever the rules of the game were, they were insufficient to prevent our adversaries from doing what they did. So maybe that means you should come up with new rules, and I guess you have to figure out what those are.
I guess the question I have is, like, we have a system of laws that currently allow, like, murder still exists, even though we have a law against murder. It's not sufficient to prevent all murderers from doing murder. And yet we still have those laws, and I would argue it's a good thing we have those laws, right? And we don't punish, and sometimes murderers get off because we have a system of rights in place, but it is still good that we prosecute them, even though it's not a perfect system. And this argument that Russia and China were able to game the system to some extent, I'm sympathetic as well. It's annoying. It's frustrating. But I don't think that's an excuse to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, no, but this is why I wanted to take this topic, because I think that there's a misconception where people conflate international law with domestic law as if there was some equivalency. Like the way what China was doing is, let's say you're playing Monopoly, right? And you're like, oh, this game is so fun. Let's all play Monopoly. You take a few turns, and then China just reaches into the till and takes all the money. And you go, hey, China, if you do that, I'll stop playing with you. And they go, yeah, and they just do it again. At a certain point, you're going to realize that there's no enforcement mechanism for the rules of Monopoly other than I don't want to play with you anymore. And they don't seem to give a fuck about that. In the US context, the good news is murderers don't get to dictate whether we have murder rules unilaterally. You murderers don't get to say, I don't like murder law, so therefore I'm immune to murder law. But China does. Russia does. That's the problem we're trying to solve.
These laws, which I'm in favor of, to be clear, this is just an argument that we should enforce it more. Yes, we should. I agree with you.
Who's gonna enforce it?
Pax Americana, baby. That's why we need to be the world police once again. Wick, okay.
The reason that China and Russia got us in a bind on this, and they did. They spotted a weakness in the system. They were pushing to get the same treatment we demand. We won't be bound by international law. And here's the thing, Wick, we're right. It would be insane and unconstitutional. I don't even think we can submit to these authorities in that way. Like, I don't think our law allows it. And even if our law did allow it, we shouldn't, because, like, God, have you seen the UN General Assembly? It's a gang of thieves. It's a fucking nightmare. So, like, what they started realizing is they were like, no, the international law is set up so that the great powers can ignore it when they want to. We are great powers, therefore we will ignore it. And we were left saying, oh, we would appreciate it if you ignored it less. But we're not arguing that we can't ignore it, because of course we can and we want to.
Again, my argument is that we should be the sole arbiters of this international law and the sole enforcers as well. It was a mistake, and the mistake was letting China, even though I don't think we had a choice with Russia during the Cold War.
We didn't have a choice, yeah.
Absolutely. After the Cold War, we absolutely did have a choice. But China specifically, we had a choice. We didn't have to give them veto power in the Security Council. We did. I think that was the mistake, and I think that there is a question, right, of what are we willing to risk in order to enforce these international laws against bigger, stronger powers than we normally have. Like in Yugoslavia is a good example. Like, we risked war, we risked death, we risked destruction, but it was a good thing that we went in and we enforced international law in that case. And we said, no, you can't genocide your neighbors, buddies, right? You cannot do that. We will stop you from doing so. The failures that we're having in the weakness that Russia and China has seen isn't just our failures to enforce, though. It's our failures to comply. And they saw that, and they weaponized that. They leveraged that to get soft power and contest soft with us in soft and hard power in various countries and places in the world, because our non-compliance made it easier for them to do so.
The part of that I would agree on is that in a world where the US was able to unilaterally dictate international law, then I think we probably ought to comply with international law as well. But that is not, unfortunately, the world. And the truth is, if we had demanded that the U.S. was the only power that had veto power in the Security Council, there would be no UN.
No, I think
right?
that would be okay to. Well, first of all, I think the UN is unfortunately not the best institution, and if the argument in our debate had been should the UN
persist,
yeah, I might be more. My answer might surprise you. I don't know if it would or not, right? But I do think that
no, you served. I don't think I'd be that surprised.
I don't. Just because there is an institution that has failed in its duty does not mean that the concept that they were trying to uphold is a bad concept.
That's what I've been trying to get at. The UN didn't fail. The UN is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is not ever enforce anything against great powers ever. That was always the design. This wasn't a bug in the system. This was a feature. It was a feature of its construction.
We have, though. I think that we did set up rules in place. So again, it was designed so that powers had an alternate route other than conflict in order to resolve their differences, even with the greater powers. And the evidence that I would give that this is the case is because that branches, for lack of a better term, to the UN, such as the World Bank and the IMF and all these other things, they have ruled against the U.S. and we have complied with it, right? And that is by design. They have been able to hold us to account.
If we wanted to have a governing world body that was super sovereign to the U.S. and could actually rule contrary to us, we could have set it up. We could have set up a system where you needed a block of 2 or a block of 3 to veto, right? We didn't, because we wanted a system in which any great power could veto at the Security Council. It's not a design flaw. It's a design feature. It's not like it's failing in its mission. It's just its mission was always this. And this is kind of the problem with international law, is that it ossifies and the world changes and then countries ignore it.
Yeah, the UN is.
Go ahead. Let's go ahead and tuck that one. We'll put it in your pocket, and we can do that one during open panel because I think more people would have more to add into it. Over on the Buy Me a Coffee app, and of course, if you send it over on Buy Me a Coffee, you get way more characters to use over there. By the way, just saying. Cheetown Deek says to be hamstrung by other nations, regardless of their reliance of international laws to constrain us, is not good. Why? Because of most nations, because of most nations know there will be some sort of consequences for not doing things in the U.S. interest. Why give a chain to our enemies, paid, provided, and enforced by us to constrain us? Makes little sense to me. And if they don't like it, they can do something about it. China ignores international norms all the time, and unless the U.S. enforces those norms, nothing is done about it. And yet China is held in high esteem. Quick response from either of you?
Sure. China is not held in high esteem. There are plenty of countries worldwide that do not like and have been taking advantage of China. The idea that China is being held in high esteem, I mean, I guess within certain spheres of influence that might be true, but in those spheres, it's because we have failed in large case to make the case that we are a better partner. And one of the reasons we failed to make that case is because we have also violated international law. And so countries have seen much less reason to see a difference between China and the U.S. And I think that there's a failing of the U.S. And I think that we are paying a price for that.
I do think we lost moral clarity. I don't think that like BRICS, for example, is like a direct consequence of us like violating international law. I think that's a direct consequence of China's ascendancy and the fact that it is now powerful enough to give a shield to nations that could align themselves with it when it previously couldn't. But in terms of moral clarity, what I think we lost isn't like about saying that international law should be upheld. What we lost was that we used to be clearer about natural law. We used to be clear about saying like, no, free speech is better than no free speech. And if you're a country that has no free speech, that sucks. And we are going to take umbrage with that. Freedom of religion is better than no freedom of religion. And if you are a theocracy, we might take umbrage with that. I think we used to be clearer on that. And while I'm not like completely discounting Wick, I think there's something to what you're saying. Part of our loss of credibility is that we've lost moral clarity also. I don't know like what we stand for these days, but that's not only Trump. That's been years and years and years.
I think Trump's the symptom, not the disease, honestly. And that's why when people say, "Oh, MAGA is just going to go away with Trump," I don't think that's necessarily true.
And that's why everyone should stand natural law. Go back to the basics. Our constitutional values, natural law. Let's do it.
Fair enough. And James sends in the Big Ten, says Crackalacken said I should send this, and good job listening to Crackalacken. But you also sent over on the Buy Me a Coffee app a big whopping $50 to complete the goal, so that the chat doesn't get hit for slacking over there. So thank you so kindly. Everybody tell James thank you in the chat. Kokomo, thanks for coming around again. We love you. Sends in a big 15, says this super chat defies international law. Fair enough. Blaster Bot over on Ryan's side sends in 5 gifted memberships.
Thank you, buddy. Enjoy those emotes.
And how do you say his name again?
Rizufso
sends out 10 Raging Tomato memberships. You guys are great with the gifting. And Grassroots, of course, we love Grassroots and his little commentary, sends out 5 Ryan memberships. Congratulations to you. Lucky lottery
I've got
winners.
to do more streams with Pisco because we've proven that Grassroots will spend basically any amount of money to tell Pisco to fuck himself. So I think I need to stream with Pisco more often.
Look, that's the secret. That's the secret.
There's nothing that gets Grassroots to open his checkbook more than seeing Pisco's face.
You bring people on that other people hate, and they will pay to say shit. Okay, that's just how it's done. But also,
fair.
Bros guy has been gifting me stuff too. So thank you for that. I know you guys can't see it, but
that's so
going
sweet.
through everyone and giving money left and right. So I do apprate you, sir.
I love that. Sharing is caring. Thank
That's
you.
why you got to do
ladies
the
and
Italian
gentlemen.
hand.
Lacey sending out not 1 but 2 more to help hit the goal with number 4 and 5. Thank you so kindly. Jason sends a big 10 over on Ryan's side, says, I wonder if Wick wants the U.S. to win. Great win, Ryan. Still undefeated. Ha, ha, ha. Any thoughts to that, Wick? Do you want the U.S. to win?
When the U.S.'s interest comes into conflict with other great powers' interests, I am always on the side of the U.S.
Yeah, but and can we just agree on that real quick? Like, it is very possible to have a reasonable difference of opinion about the conflict in Iran, for example. That there's a lot of things to have a reasonable disagreement about. I think I saw Kyle Kalinske and Hassan this week taking the position that they would like Iran to win.
That would be horrible.
Fuck yourself. Like you like at the very least know what team you're on, right? Like geopolitics is a team sport. You're on a team. You can't root for the other team. That's not how this goes.
And let's just see the results of an Iran win, a victory against the U.S. would be astronomically bad, not just for the U.S., but for the world as a whole.
They executed
Iran,
like 20,000
just because I don't
people.
like how we're conducting ourselves in Iran currently for a host of reasons that we can get into another day, doesn't mean I think that Iran are good guys. Iran is a horrific regime that has massacred its people. I'm glad Khomeini is dead. May he rot. Right. That said, I mean, look, the fact that we didn't know that they were going to close the Hormuz Strait and we didn't really have a plan to deal with that. Come on, gang. Everyone knew they were going to do that. What do you mean you didn't have a plan? Amateur hour.
Chapingro.
Chapingro.
I'm stuck in the Italian voice now.
It works well for me that you are in that mode because I am not, so it works. Chapingro says, Sarah Tomato was amazing as always. Thank you so kindly. The Malali, Ryan folk are very kind over here to me with their nice words. Wix people are good to me too. You all are. You're all very nice. FDN. I've only seen nice things from your chat. FDNY sends in the big 5, says, how have the UN peacekeeping blue helmets done historically in maintaining international law?
Great in Yugoslavia.
Yeah, it's when there isn't a veto, UN Security Council can do some pretty impressive things. The problem is there's always a veto, but occasionally, there's no veto.
All right. And James is cheating on me again. He has this habit of going around to all the other channels just so he knows I could see the super chats. Cheater. James sends it the big 5 Ryan memberships over there, but then also backs it up too. It says with 1410, he says 5 gifted subs from earlier plus 5 gifted subs plus 14.1 super chat equals 64. Does Wick have more or less than 64 visa stamps in U.S. passport that allows him to visit nice countries and not international law?
I've visited less than 64 countries, unfortunately.
You burnt.
I'm
He
burnt.
got you.
He got me.
Bum, bum, bum. And last one I'll read, and then we've got the open panel. They've all been patiently waiting backstage. Jason says the Big Ten says, does Wick honestly think we didn't plan for them closing the strait? Really?
Do you know why I say this? Is because that's what they told the Security Council, the U.S. security people that are going on. That's what the reporting says. They said that they didn't really have a plan for this. They underestimated it. That's what they said. I get the exact quote if you need, right? But this is the report that they're saying. I'm not just saying it out of my ass. I'm saying that the administration is saying this.
I don't know. I mean, Rubio predicted in 2015 that Iran would be investing in a number of things.
But he said Trump was the greatest threat to the U.S. that we've ever seen, too.
Amongst those things that they were investing in was the Swift boats that they're using to attack various ships. And I mean, we did, I remember at the time, we blew up that Iranian warship with a submarine. And, the people on the left were on X chanting about how that violated international law, which I found particularly funny given the circumstances. So, I mean, I don't think that we didn't have a plan for it. I just think it's been harder than we would have liked it to been. But we have destroyed an enormous amount of their Navy.
All right. Are you gentlemen ready to meet your panel?
Let's do it.
All
right.
Is this a good panel or a tarred panel, Sarah? Be honest.
Let's see.
Oh no, I think that's the answer.
I mean, I've got I don't know. I've got a few solids back there, but it's why it's open panel.
if you donate 100 to Sarah, maybe you can convince her to make rankings for the various panelverse members on their tarred scale, so she can have a list about how many tarred points you have, and then you can talk about the average that participates in any given panel.
Nice. Well, let's go into full tarred mode. Ready? Here we go. Okay. Did the video play?
The video played. We saw the video. It was a good video.
Okay. Is everybody lying to me? Because nothing played on my end.
It blacks out on the host side sometimes, but it almost always actually plays on YouTube and for everyone else in the studio.
Ooh. Okay, thank you. Because I get nervous sometimes. I'm like, I can see everybody backstage and on screen, but my video's not playing, but everybody's muted. Like, what is going on? All right, so here's how we do the first part of Gauntlet. Most of you are very familiar with this portion of it, but we're going to play very nicely up front on the first piece of it. And then afterwards, when we go into full Gauntlet mode, then we move into a complete open floor. Otherwise, I'd like every single person in the room, except for Wick, myself, and Ryan, to mute themselves. And if I give you the talking stick, it is your turn to ask your question. You're going to ask your question. You get your response, small little discourse back and forth, and then we move on to the next person. We're going to try and keep it. We're going to try to keep it fairly quick since we're rounding to the 3-hour mark. and then we'll go into full open floor. Okay. So Spin City, I know you were backstage hanging out first, waiting very, very patiently and screaming from the chat. I will leave it to you, sir. Your question.
I'm going to start with a statement and then I'll ask my question. Ryan, you're based. Wick, you're a fucking moron. Oh. Anyway, moving on. In true fashion. Anyway, libtard. Define the word
cocksucker. What do you say?
Define the word ought.
Ought. We should.
We ought to.
We should do it. Yes.
Okay. Point proven. Move on.
All right. Over.
He got me there. When I say we should follow international law, we ought follow international law. Point proven, I guess. Jesus Christ. I'm so glad. Can I just say, I'm so glad my opponents, right? The people who disagree with me, for the most part, Ryan, you're excluded in this. I like you, Ryan. They're just retards. They're fucking sub-IQ people, right? They're the most brain-drained, dumbass, bullshit people who make me look like geniuses in comparison, because I'm not.
Wick, are you going to drop another Somali comment? Because I've been on this IQ road
before.
And
you gotta speak their language. These people, okay.
All right, let me move on over.
Wick gets spicy when he talks about IQ.
Grim Reaper, I hope you bring up the IQ level of the panel. Please ask your question or make your comment.
Well, I can't really confirm that or deny being British, but I just want to ask, first of all, the moron, Wick. You say ought isn't a word, but it actually is. And the thing is, international law can't be enforced by any country or any organization. Therefore, America can do what the hell it likes because no one's going to hold them to account. Why? Okay. Because without the Americans and without the other allies, the Second World War would never have been won. And we would have been faced with fascists. Now we're faced with communists. Are you turning around and saying that communists is the right thing to do? We ought not to fight them?
So, one, when did I say that ought wasn't a word?
You didn't.
I know. Why did you claim I just did?
You didn't actually say it. You implied it, sir.
When did I imply that ought wasn't a word?
You implied that ought wasn't in international law, and that what the argument was from Ryan was that we don't have to. You don't have to abide by international law. And you're saying that you must. But then you were counteracting yourself by saying, well, we can pick and choose what we want to do. Huh?
Okay,
doesn't
so
make
I think
sense
you're
to me.
mistaken.
At one time, I would have looked over to across the pond and gone, we should be following them, right? But with people like you, I question that.
Okay, so first
because you are not getting it right.
Okay, so
at the end of the day, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna let them have fun, sir. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sure, take your time.
First of all, I think you are making a mistake. Because my disagreement here with Ryan is he says ought comes from another place other than international law. And I, again, don't think that matters. I think that regardless of where the ought is and where it comes from, it still exists. So I'm not implying it doesn't exist. I am reifying its existence. And again, should and must are different questions. I do not claim, and nor did I say here, that we must apply or comply with international law. In fact, I have said on several occasions that there are instances where I would not comply with international law under certain circumstances. It's not a suicide pact, man. So it just gives me pause when you get every single statement that you have made about what I have said just wrong. It's as if you haven't been listening.
Oh, I've been listening. I just find it absolutely amazing that an American doesn't want America to win. I'm sorry.
I directly said not 10 minutes ago that I want America to win.
No,
the way we win, we win is by beating China and beating Russia and beating our adversaries through not just hard power, but soft power. And one of the ways that we extend our soft power is when countries trust us to be honest and to keep our word, which is one of the things that we do when we comply with international law. We have agreed and signed to a treaty saying we would act in X manner, and to the extent that we act in X manner, it shows that we are a trustworthy ally and that they can rely on us and our word. That is wanting America to win.
Sure. Okay, so all right, and I'll give you that. You want America to win.
Yes.
Right? Would you justify the means?
Not in every case. Like, I wouldn't rape a baby for America to win.
Nobody's asking you to do that.
Okay, ask me, would I justify the means and the ends? Not in every case. I don't think the ends necessarily justify the means. And I gave you a clear example.
Say something like that?
Hold on, Spin. What did I say about everybody's mic? Thank you.
Why would I say something like that? To give a clear example, an extreme example where I don't think the ends justify the means. Answering your question on, do the means justify the ends? No, not necessarily. Like, I wouldn't do anything to win.
Okay, so the means of justification.
He did say that if there was a situation where international law said X, and I gave him the hypo, international law says X, it's contrary to U.S. interests. Should the U.S. nonetheless do X? He said no. Now, to me, like if you think that U.S. ought follow international law, that seems like a little bit of a problem for his side of the argument. But he was taking the prompt to mean something somewhat different. But I think he did concede that if it was not in our interest, we should ignore international law.
Yeah, but my argument again is that in general, our interest is in following natural law, that we should follow not natural law, international law.
Okay,
because...
So can I ask you a silly question then?
You can ask
a totally silly question.
Like,
going back in time, right? Okay, fantastic, love it. When was the invasion to secure weapons of mass destruction? You can remember that far back. I'm sure you're old enough to. Sure. Would you have said that was justified?
If they had weapons of mass destruction...
When no weapons were found?
Okay. The reason that the Iraq War was a problem for me is because they lied to us about why we were going in, right? They said that there was mass destruction. And if they had been, because there were treaties at the time where Iraq had UN inspectors come in to make sure that they were complying with these treaties and that they weren't making these weapons of mass destruction. And if, right, they had been in violation of those treaties, it would have been a good thing to enforce those treaties by invading them and punishing them for not complying. It's part of applying teeth to international law. But because that turned out to be a lie that was sold to us and it was not true, that's the problem I have with Iraq. If it hadn't been a lie, I would have a different opinion.
So the question is, was it lawful or not to go in?
Was it lawful
did it comply
or
with
not?
International?
It violated.
Yeah,
I think it violated some international treaties, I believe. But again, the people who decide whether it's lawful or not are not me, right? Don't listen to what I say. Listen to what the international institutions.
You're right. I won't.
I wrap it
up. What I was trying to say to you, what I'm trying to get across is that Ryan put a very good argument for the US involvement, right? Whereas you're a little bit more wishy-washy and sat on the fence. That was all. But thank you, Sarah, for letting me up and having a chat. First time up here. I'll try and come again. I'm being over in UK. There's a big time difference, so apologies. I'm going to have to drop.
Yeah, get some sleep. Stay over there.
I need to get some sleep. Yeah. Cheers. Anyway, thank you very much.
Graham. We appreciate having you. No problem. Sasquatch to you, sir.
Yes, sir. All right. So when it comes to international law, who's going to enforce it?
I think
beyond that, there's only one enforceable way forward for an international law to exist and be executed on the U.S., and that's if the U.S. starts adding territories. we're the international law in that case. Manifest globalism. Let's do it.
Pax Americana. I'm with you, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, this is the problem. The problem that we're having is that we created this international rules-based order, and it was designed on the presumption that there would never be a power that could rival us, and then one emerged, and then now all of a sudden the rules aren't looking as good as they used to. And I think that like ultimately, geopolitics is a power struggle. That's what it is.
But this is again, and not to retread old ground, but I think one of the reasons that they have been able to rival us is because of our failure to comply with international law that we've set up. And I think that it has weakened us abroad and at home, right? Because as you said, we're in a wave of populism. I don't think that's good for the country. And you might disagree, I don't know, right? But I don't think populism is a good ideology, but our failures on the international stage and to apply the rules to ourselves have led to a populist wave that is, I think, destroying our ability to be involved in conflicts that we need to be involved in.
Well, populism, the analogy I like to give is that populism is a bulldozer. It's not very good at building new institutions, but when you have institutions that need demolishing, it's the tool that shows up when there's something rotten in Denmark, something has to be done. I think we're in a wave of populism because people are genuinely pretty dissatisfied with the structure of our government right now, and they'd like something to change. I don't know that it has anything to do with international politics. I think that's more of a domestic thing.
Well, I think the Iraq War I would point to is, at least internationally, is the kind of
something. But the thing is though, you can always cherry pick your friends, but China's rise in part was because we didn't freeze them out and we let them get access to the WTO. We let them get access to all this money in the hopes that having them in the international rules-based order would make them a good trading partner, and it did not.
Yeah, but that was a failure, because one of the criticisms that they had at the time, and I remember discussing this in my high school class actually, is we did not want them to be part of it, or at least some of us didn't want them to be part of it because of their gross human rights violations.
Gross human rights violations. Yeah, yes. Of course.
And we were like, this might be a mistake to let them in this manner. And it turns out it was.
Yeah, I think that, if you want to go back to how did this happen to us, I think that was the moment. What we actually should have done is held our ground on that. And of course, I'm a natural law enjoyer. Sure. So I'm going to say I think we should have held our ground when we had more leverage over them and said until you actually look like a real free speech having, freedom of expression having, freedom of association having, natural law enjoying, democracy or republic, take your pick, but one of those two, then we're not trading with you. We don't give a fuck how many Big Macs you're going to buy. I think that would have been the way to solve this problem.
To be fair, that's easy to say with hindsight, right? At the time, it was
same as the TPP. It's the big what if. Yeah.
Yes. But I tend to agree with you. Oh, anyway, go ahead.
Sasquatch, you look like you were trying to add something else into that.
The whole point to that statement was that there is no constitutional mechanism to subvert American authority over American waters. So, and even when it comes to having oppositional framework with foreign countries, that's handled under war powers and whatnot. Not, you know what I'm saying? Once diplomacy is broken down, it becomes war, right?
Yeah, but that's one of the reasons we have these international institutions, is to avoid things like that. And it's one of the reasons why...
And when they fail...
Sure, but they don't always fail, and I think that's the mistake people are making.
Of course not.
And I think that,
but the point I'm making is when they fail, they no longer have any bearing on the international treaties in question, because once war is declared, all that kind of goes out of the window, with the exception of a handful of Geneva Conventions, or as the Canadians put it, Geneva Suggestions.
Well, we do have multiple treaties, not just the Geneva Convention, to how we conduct ourselves during war. And I think that's a good thing that we have these. And to the extent that we've violated those, I think it's shameful as a country that we have, especially when it comes to extrajudicial detainments and what was the word? Enhanced interrogation techniques and things like that. But we had that during the discussion. But I think that I've given several examples in this conversation of times where the U.S. has allowed itself to be bossed around, for lack of a better term, by these international institutions and organizations.
But it is really funny, though, because the enhanced interrogation in the Guantanamo Bay era, right? On one hand, we always do this in the U.S. We see a problem, and then we think we solved the problem, and it just creates the next one, where we say, like, oh, man, we really can't capture people and put them in Guantanamo Bay and do enhanced interrogation. Oh, well, I guess we better fucking kill them with drones. You know, like we go for, like, if we did the same thing domestically, though this is a big tangent, you know, we were like, oh man, there's a segment of the population that just cannot abide by society's laws. Let's put them in mental institutions. Oh shit, that didn't work. Let's put them all in prisons. Oh fuck, mass incarceration, that doesn't work. Now we're trying, let's have them live on the streets and see how that goes. Like, unfortunately, we do have this secular thing where we end up with you solve one problem and then you're like, oh shit, the next one doesn't look so good.
We call that government, sir. That's government.
Yep, I think that might just be what it is.
Fair enough. Effigy, let's move it over to you, sir.
Hello. Great conversation, guys. I love it when it happens that we actually have conversations, and topics like this lend more to those kind of nuanced conversations, because I don't feel that there's a hard moral component, and morality is usually what we all get emotional about. But I think I'm with Wick on this, and that the hinge of it, because I'm not a big, like, you know, moral international law, you've got to follow it because it's the good. I agree that we use it in a strategic way, but to me, the hinge point here is interest. So Ryan, I want to ask you a couple of questions, because I think the idea of what you think is interest and what we think is in the national interest, I think that the two things can't always lead to the same place. So is it cheaper to maintain influence through a system of shared rules in diplomatic institutions rather than an influence system where we constantly unilaterally use military intervention and create forever wars? Which of those two is cheaper?
If it works, it's cheaper. The problem was it wasn't working. Or sorry, I shouldn't say it wasn't working. It stopped working. When it was working, it was obviously cheaper.
Sure, but don't you think it stopped working due to also some of the things we did? To me, it seems that that international law, like, the idea of it is trying to create like a Nash's equilibrium, right? You remember, for those who don't know, you guys remember that movie Beautiful Mind? It's what Russell Crowe explained about augmenting Adam Smith. It's that in a system, you just going for your own interest doesn't get you the best good, but also caring that everybody else gets their good as well will get everybody a better result. And I think that's what international law tries to do, is put us all in a system where not just our interests are getting served, but everyone else's, because it elevates all of them.
I think that's the myth of international law, which I know many people believe in. But I think the myth is that it created a rules-based order that was going to put little countries on equal egalitarian footing with big countries, and it was all going to be fair, and it was going to rise all ships, and we were going to have these international bodies that were going to be fair and impartial, and we'd have the world government, and et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is, international law was never designed to do that. When I said it was a feature, not a bug, that the UN is designed the way it is, it was not a bug. The US would not submit to the UN losing sovereignty to the UN.
Sure, but don't you think that even the belief in that helps us? Don't you think just having people believe that helps us?
The myth?
That we can, yes, sure. People, I mean, shit. People, we talk about people believing in myths all the time, from my perspective.
I mean,
on this show.
I think it might have. The problem is ultimately, we can get into. I mean, the problem when you're talking about causation,
because international law, in a way, is kind of like bully on the block, right? You want to get people on your side so that you can have a big group go up to the bigger countries and be like, look, we got all these people, and since we're all reliant on international trade, which has less to do with like the countries themselves and more to do with the businesses that are, doing the international trade. If you can all bully up on them because we're all linked by this international law, that's a really good strategic way instead of like starting a war, right?
If we could have prevented, and we can get into the why, and the why, by the way, you'll never answer, because with something as complicated as geopolitics, there's always going to be 100 causal factors, right? So we're never going to get like one factor that did everything. But if you look at the emergence of China and Russia on the world stage, Russia with the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and China as a rising economic power post 2001. If we could have prevented that from happening, I think the US would still be maximally invested in a globally US hegemony favoring international legal order, and that be the position that we were taking. The problem is, whether through incompetence or whatever else, we didn't and couldn't. So as a result, as these rules no longer favor us the way they used to, we are treating them differently. And that's not illogical. That's rational.
Again, there's a couple
It makes
things.
a more chaotic world, right?
Just a couple things that I feel the need, I feel compelled to state that that wasn't a myth, right? Since the establishment of the rules-based order, we have worldwide conflict has gone down. The risk of death in conflict has dropped drastically. Countries throughout the world have gotten out of poverty, have become more wealthy, have become more healthy. Life expectancy has gone up tremendously, and it's not perfect. There are still problems, but the fact that we have the wealth and prestige and power that we have today was directly due, in part, not entirely, but to the emergence of an international, global, world-based order. It's not a myth. Calling it a myth is just ahistorical.
The myth is not that it didn't create prosperity and that it did. I agree with all those parts that you said. The myth was that it was ultimately a rules-based order, because it's a rules-based order for non-great powers. That's what it always was. That's what it was structurally designed to be. Now, it was a useful myth. It was a useful myth. The problem is, when our adversaries, who are great powers, emerged, the fact that it was never true got exposed, because when they started violating international law, there was fuck all that international law could do about it.
But look at the timeline here that you're looking at. You're looking at Crimea, which is in 2014, which is far and away after the causal, link that we put in is our failure to follow international rules and based orders and enforce them. From Iraq War, Afghanistan War onward, right? And we look at China, that's a little bit of a different question. It was our failure to uphold the standards that we had that led to their rise. It was the international order didn't fail us. We failed the international order.
I just said all this. If we could have
suppressed... Also, our politics fractured on international law at some point in the 80s and 90s.
Yes,
if we could have suppressed China and Russia from ascending the way they did, then we would be more supportive of international law today, but we were unable to.
I don't think so.
There's many reasons that we were unable to, but that's...
I disagree. I disagree, because as Effigy stated, like after the Cold War, because we destroyed Russia. Russia, as the USSR, because of our alliances and our soft power, we crushed them economically. Reagan won that, as well as the other previous presidents. It was a great victory. And afterwards, the mistake that we made as a country was like, well, now we don't have to follow this anymore because it fulfilled its purpose. And that began our slide to what we have now. It allowed for the emergence of China.
I think
it allowed for the emergence of the new Russia, right?
I think I think you're pegging too much onto the Iraq conflict. Ultimately, China's rise, I don't think had much to do with that.
That became because of the collapse of the USSR, and we decided we didn't need to follow these strictures anymore.
Well, I don't think adding China to the WTO and letting them get all this investment money is because of Iraq. I think that was just a bad geopolitical decision.
No, that wasn't because of Iraq. That's true, because I think that happened before.
But China's ascendancy is the thing that's truly crippling, is truly creating the problem right now, not the blowout back from Iraq.
Effigy, are you all wrapped up?
Yeah, just one really quick last question. You mentioned sovereignty earlier, and we had in like the 90s and early 2000s, this was a big thing. The Agenda 21 conspiracy people who thought the United Nations was going to send in troops and that we signed away our sovereignty and all that. Do you think sovereignty is more valuable than security and economic stability?
Yes.
Because I don't think you can have all three in a lawless world.
Sovereignty is more valuable than security and economic stability. If you don't have sovereignty, you're not a nation. Sovereignty is what defines a nation. And when you give up sovereignty in exchange for security or economic stability, you are now at the whim of whoever you gave up the sovereignty to. And maybe you get economic security today, maybe you get security today, but that whim could change. And ultimately, America is correct not to let any other nation, not to let any other international body have sovereignty over us. We would be foolish to do so, because once you sign away your power, you have to get it back at the butt of a gun.
All right.
I don't know if I disagree with you on that one. I'm probably aligned, but yeah, that's all I got to ask.
Thank you, Effigy. Mr. Clay, to you, please.
Hey, everybody. I just want to make sure that I'm on the. Oh, am I? Yeah. Testing.
I'll do it on. I'm just meant your volume is coming in really loud. I got you.
Yeah, test.
I got you on my end. You're good.
Very good. I just want to make sure that I'm operating based on the correct assumptions. Let's start with whether or not we're going to go by all international law. So the U.S. signs a treaty. That's considered international law, correct?
Yes.
If other countries sign treaties that the U.S. does not sign, that's also considered international law, but it is not something that we consider part of our law.
Well,
or our
international law does not require us to be obedient or, I guess, in compliance with treaties that we do not sign. That's part of the idea of international law.
Can I do the law nerd thing just to I'm not sure it's gonna be helpful, but just to be as clear as possible.
Very good.
If you sign a treaty, which just means the president signs it, Congress didn't ratify it, then the U.S. is obliged, not obligated, but obliged, whatever that means, not to act contradictory to its purposes. If you ratify it, then you're supposed to do whatever the treaty says, in theory, right?
Okay, so I'm going to assume he meant ratify, right?
I'm just trying to be. And then the third category that got brought up briefly in the debate is what's called customary international law, which is where a norm has been accepted so universally that even though there is no treaty, it is considered part of international law. And if I recall correctly, Wick took the position that he would consider that the least binding because we didn't sign the document.
Yep. Very good. Very good. Okay, so then would this conversation be about all international law, or would it only be regarding the international law in which the U.S. has signed?
I think that for the most part, at least from my perspective, and Ryan can have his own, right? It's from what we have agreed to do, right? What we have ratified, what we have said, we are held to, we are going to bind ourselves to this. And again, we are currently under the remit of 200 such multilateral agreements and many more bilateral agreements where we have not just signed, but have ratified as well. And these range the gamut from things like the Geneva Conventions, even though there are additions to the Geneva Conventions which haven't been ratified, right? But for the most part, we are ratified them. And then it also goes to like things like aviation, right? Where we have ratified treaties like the civil aviation, where there's a set of rules to orbits in space, where satellites go on, and we have agreed to say, when we put a satellite into orbit, we're going to let and share its like orbit with everyone else so they don't have collisions and shit like that. It's just really helpful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so and the reason I bring up customary international law is that, like, I brought up the law of the sea treaty at one point. 169 countries have ratified that. The U.S. has not. It generally complies with it and as customary international law, but we didn't sign it, and of course we did not submit ourselves to the international body that it created. So this is where you get international law gets complicated, because there's all these kind of like shades of gray when you get onto the margins, which is a little bit trickier.
And one of the things I'm glad we didn't do in this conversation, I worried we would, right? Because in preparing for this, I realized just how large of a topic this is, that you could simply find a treaty and poke at it and say, well, what about this treaty? And like depending on which treaty you picked, I might be like, I have no fucking idea what this treaty says.
Well, but it's also the other nightmare is that when we bombed Libya, we got accused of violating international law by all kinds of people, right? And some of them might have had points, right? It's like, who decides whether we violated international law? It's not. It's often unclear.
That's why I want to ask this question. So let's throw out the customary and the stuff we haven't signed on to.
Just
right?
the signed stuff.
Let's just focus on the signed stuff. The ought we always comply with those international laws?
Always.
That's my question to Ryan.
Oh
no, I think Wick would even say no to that.
No,
because
always is a large word, man. I would say usually, most of the time, 90% of cases.
So you're saying generally, right?
Yeah,
generally. You did say that. I do remember that.
I mean, I think now, all and by the way, to the extent that it's helpful, like all else being equal, I would agree with that. Right. If the question is what happens when it's not all else equal, like
right. Okay. So this is the problem that I have with that argument of not always. Article 6 of the Constitution, the second clause, specifically defines treaties along with the laws of the United States, that those are the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, but it also defines that those are also the supreme law of the land. So if you are not willing to comply with those specific ones, then you are actually defying the Constitution. You're not complying with the Constitution. You're not complying with the supreme law of the land.
I don't know that specific article in Constitution. I just don't.
Fair enough.
Here's the thing, and I think this came up, like how that applies to constitutional law. We have a system in place to decide that. We have institutional bodies to ameliorate any disagreements that come. Like, is this binding? Is this not binding?
Yeah, and it's our court. Our court is that final Supreme Court will decide that whether a treaty really is valid on its face or not, right? So, but then of course it would take someone challenging the treaty, so on and so forth. But in the lieu of whether it's legal and lawful, we've established that the Constitution states that it's legal and lawful, and that those bodies must, as long as it hasn't been decided by the Supreme Court, that they must adhere to it. And then the question comes in, ought they adhere to it because it is the Constitution? Ought our government adhere to the Constitution? And I would say yes, in all cases.
Yeah. So what and you'll forgive me because I can't remember the name of the case. I wish I could remember. It would make this a better point. But the way that this came out is that the Constitution says exactly what Clay says. The Constitution and the treaties are the law of the land. And the court over time actually said, no, the order is like Constitution, federal law, treaties on the same level, state law. And they made a hierarchy. So because the Constitution, for example, gives the president purview over international relations, if the president chooses to violate the treaty as part of his constitutional authority, he can do so despite the language in the Constitution, because his constitutional role trumps the language of the treaty. So we ended up going this direction where we said that the laws of treaties cannot supplant the Constitution, whereas Europe went the other direction. They said that what ours says literally, though the court went the other way, that the Constitution and treaties are on equal footing. And I actually think it's been disastrous for them.
That's dangerous. Now
they're stuck with they're stuck with this like bureaucratic nightmare of a government that will basically put them into managed decline, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Well, I guess unless they all exit. My question would be this: do you want your government to have that much power? My idea of the government is to limit the power of the government. The Constitution is to limit the power of the government, not to give it more. So by allowing the president, or the president and the Senate, by the way, it's actually the president and the Senate who chooses those treaties. When they have that much power where they can basically, at that point, usurp the Constitution, then that's more dangerous than them actually complying with those treaties that they have signed, because that is contractual law. That is the way that
you are 100% right, Clay. Your intuition is dead fucking on, and that's actually the exact reason the Supreme Court gave. Because like, if you want to amend the Constitution, you need a supermajority in Congress and you need 3/4 of the states. But ratifying a treaty is way easier. So if a treaty and the Constitution are on the same level, then you don't need to amend the Constitution. You just ratify a treaty. And then you've changed the Constitution, and no matter what the people say or how they vote, they're stuck with it. So it turned out that you just couldn't have treaties on the same level as Constitution, because it would let the government take this outsized power that it shouldn't have by dressing it up as international relations. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Clay. Based as fuck.
Yay, IQ level raised. Ant, to you, sir.
Hey, Wick. Just a quick question. So, did I understand correctly that you would favor a independent international body that would handle overseeing international law?
It would depend on how it looks. I think that the existence of an independent international body that can resolve conflicts between nations, even great powers, would make the world a better place, because it gives an outlet for resolving conflict other than war, which was one of the problems before we had a solid international rules-based order. Is that the only remedy, I should say, for a lot of these countries was just to grab guns and go.
Also, I did want to push back a little bit on the China thing. That happened much earlier than you're suggesting. Really, what the turning point there was Nixon opening up Western markets in the 70s to China.
With China, there was several turning points. You are correct in that only Nixon can go to China, right? There's a whole meme. That did represent a turning point for China in their rise. But I think that there are several places along that path where we could have stepped in and said, I think we're going to enforce our ideas of civil rights and civil liberties, and just how you treat your citizens. And if you aren't able to meet that standard, we're gonna not allow you into the international community.
And 100% agreed. I am not a fan of the CCP and their atrocities against their own people.
Yep.
I think the reason we ended up hyper fixating on the WTO membership is the WTO was such a good example of an international body that we sometimes comply with and sometimes don't. That we spent a lot of time on the WTO, and then that kind of put the focus on 2001 era. But I agree.
Thing about the WTO is that only we have a veto, no one else does.
Oh.
Because we do. We're the big swinging dick on the block. Who's going to tell us no?
Right. I'm pretty sure. Let me double check that, but I'm pretty sure that the WTO is, again, we are the only country with a veto power here.
I'm going to take you at your word.
I have not heard that before. I don't know.
Let me double check. It might be the IMF.
I would be surprised because they ruled against us. So, like, how did we get ruled against?
Because we don't always use our veto power when it's in our interest to comply, because there's benefits to complying, even though it hurts us in the short term.
But that's what I mean. They ruled against us and we ignored it. Like, why would we not veto if they...
Because if all we did was veto everything that ruled against us, it would be less of a respected organization, and so people wouldn't...
So sorry. We have a veto in terms of rulemaking, not in terms of adjudicating.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
So like if we want to make a rule, we have a veto. This is AI, by the way, so please don't take I'm not betting my legal reputation on it. But if China brings a case and says the US violated the existing rules by putting a tariff on us, we can't veto the adjudication. But if we want to create a new rule, we can. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because we've been asking for economic cyber espionage. And all the things that China does that violates, we think, international law. We'd like to crack down on currency manipulation, IP theft, cyber crimes, and China keeps fucking vetoing. So that would actually make a lot of sense.
Okay.
So there you go. I was slightly wrong on the veto. It only applied to one section. My bad.
International law is really big and complicated.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I can't be this is one of the things that I was worried about when preparing for this, because there's a ton.
Fair enough.
I'm
James Vagabond, welcome to the panel. I love new faces. You're more than welcome to ask your question to either of the gentlemen.
Yeah. First, I just want to say another great conversation out of Wick and Ryan here. Just good faith as always. Love it. My question was, I actually jumped in late, so I didn't hear the full conversation, but I found it interesting when Ryan was saying that the United States needs to reestablish that it has lethality and that it's a force in the world. And I find it ironic that Republicans had been so loath to want to support Ukraine, which seemed like a place where there was clear objectives and clear, ally versus enemy distinction there. And I feel like if we would have gone any further than we did, the Republicans were fighting us the whole way up to that. Wouldn't they have objected to us, showing that we're a dominant force, even though Ukraine was able to stand up to Russia just with our support?
I'm as hawkish as I've heard anyone be on the internet, and even I don't think that going to war with a nuclear power directly is a good idea. Like, I think that the truth, and this is why Iran can never be allowed to have a nuke. The truth is, once a country has that type of weaponry, certain options are just off the table. I think that, like, when you have great powers with that kind of destructive force, there's a reason it's always proxy conflict, because if you fight directly, who knows where it ends. That said, the US was so soft in 2014 with Crimea, like so fucking soft. And does that mean we should have put boots on the ground then? I think we probably couldn't. I think Russia is a nuclear state. I think that still holds. But
well, perhaps
short
just
of
armed
that,
Ukraine
our response
harder.
should have been catastrophic.
Could we have just armed Ukraine harder, at least, maybe?
Yeah, arm Ukraine harder. Take proxy retaliation against Russia's allies. Like, I think we should have been
a ton of options.
We short of attacking Russia directly, we should have gone hard in the paint in 2014 and crushed Russia at that point. Like, it was a huge mistake not to respond more aggressively than we did, in my opinion. But
and I agree with that. Just to jump in here, I agree with his assessment here. I don't think that means we had to go to war with Russia. I don't think that was on the table. I think that there were plenty of other options that we had. Like he said, taking control of their proxies, attacking their proxies, isolating them further on the world stage, not just through sanctions, but through removing some of their interests that were abroad, not in their home territory. Plenty of options. And again, we had the power to do so. We decided not to, and that was a mistake.
Yeah. I almost wonder if at that moment in 2014, if there was will to do something like, let's figure out whether Russia's really going to be part of the UN going forward. Like, there's no legal mechanism, by the way, by which you could do this, because the Security Council has a veto. But, like, would there have been some appetite to be like, look, if you're invading your neighbors for territorial wars of aggression, you don't get to be in the UN anymore. Like, some reshuffling of the world order that actually took into account what was happening.
I don't know if there would have been a public appetite for that, but one of the things that we do in America, and I think this is a good thing, is certain decisions aren't made democratically in America, and I think that's good. And one of the things is we don't vote on foreign policy directly in how things, we vote on representatives. And I think that one of the responsibilities a leader has, especially a second-term leader like Obama, who wasn't up for re-election, like, one of the responsibilities they have is, if you know something needs to happen, even though there might not be public appetite for it and you might pay a price electorally, you should do it anyway.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we fumbled there, and then the the withdrawal of Afghanistan, which was like a well-documented fumble. The Syria fumble that we talked about. We had a few pretty major fumbles on the highest level of the world stage.
Okay, there's been a lot of fumbles in the last 20 years, 30 years, in fact. But
well, if I can cope on behalf of Obama in not going further on Ukraine, that would have cost significant, political capital and could have alienated a huge amount of the voter base at a time where he had a slim margin to begin with, and it was evaporating by 2014.
Maybe, yeah. It's like it's hard to. It's not something I could give you a clear, definitive answer.
Yeah,
on
yeah. It would be like, if we could make the decision in a vacuum, then great. We'd all like to help Ukraine more, but as it stands, the world is. You got to contend with things.
Well, this is what I meant about America kind of losing its moral clarity. I think that there was an era where we, for better or worse, took the position where it's like, no, like we actually do have this vision of natural rights. We do have this vision of like how people should live and what the right way to do things is and what a functioning democracy looks like. And we were attempting to be forceful about that. And then like flash forward to 2014, they're like, oh, you're conquering Ukraine. Difference of opinion, I guess. It's just, like we'll give you some sanctions, see what happens. And it's like, it unfortunately just doesn't work. Like we have competing, the Russian worldview, the Chinese worldview, and the US worldview are not compatible. They are diametrically opposed worldviews, and it's an influence and power struggle, and we have to be honest about that.
All right. The gauntlet is officially open. That channel is up, running, and live now. I've dropped the link into the Raging Tomato chat if you want to start moving over there now, or you'll catch the raid from there. If you're watching on the Raging Tomato side, I am shutting that side down now. To you, gentlemen, the floor is officially open. If anybody wants to jump in and add in some other thoughts, if you would like to join open panel, if you were didn't make the first cut and you want to jump on now's the time to do so. We do have one spot on panel open. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until somebody leaves or gets booted. All right, it's open. Spin City, I know you were kind of frantic over there during some spots. You wanna start jumping in?
I will yield to somebody else right this minute.
Fair
really
enough.
quick, while we're still on Ukraine, I'd just like to say, can you imagine the dividends we would be getting from Ukraine if we would have invested more? Right now, we're going to Ukraine because they've got a cheaper way to stop Iranian drones than we have, and a more effective way. Like the dividends that would have been paid of us investing more in them and the things that they've been developing through drone warfare, the first place where all-out drone warfare was happening, would be huge at this point. So in a way, we kind of screwed ourselves by not supporting them more.
This is one of those weird things. I know I'm on here to be the right winger, but my position on international law is almost universally hawkish, which made me very unpopular on the right at various. So I thought we should have done more in Ukraine in 2014. I thought we should have done more in Ukraine subsequently. I thought we should have supported Israel more. I thought we should have struck Venezuela. I thought we should have struck Iran. I'm generally pro U.S. hegemony, and I am pro U.S. Enforcing the U.S. values to the extent that we can. So you're not going to get any argument from me. I think that we had multiple opportunities to do better on Ukraine, and we did not either time. Now, does that mean infinite aid packages? I actually think there probably could have been more aggressive and effective ways to do it, but I think we should have done more for sure.
Do our interests trump our morals? When we support places like Saudi Arabia or other places that it can be just as bad?
I'm not sure what that means. It's a complicated question. So I think it's going to be
I agree. It's a complicated question.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's a one size fits all there. I think that our moral obligation to our citizens is a lot more absolute than our obligation to instill American values abroad, if only practically because we can't.
It's a spectrum, right? Like there are levels here where we have responsibility that trump others, but I think that in general, morality is a weird question. I do believe that if we give our word, we should keep our word, but that's not just because it's moral. It's because it's pragmatic as well, right?
Yeah. And so, like, as a natural law enjoyer, the way I'd frame it is that the U.S. has an absolute moral obligation to secure the natural rights of its citizens, and it has an international obligation to promote natural law. But I don't think we can have an absolute obligation to secure the natural rights of foreigners because practically there's no path to do so. It's just it's impractical.
Just out of curiosity.
By that logic, we shouldn't have gone to Europe in World War II.
No, I don't think that follows.
No, think.
In fact,
other people on their country have been getting attacked.
If you read the opening transcript, I thought we'd do more on genocide, so I prepped this. If you read the opening arguments from the prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, when they had a problem because there was no crime of genocide, and genocide was not illegal under Nazi law. So there was no law to punish the Nazis with. It didn't exist. And the argument that they made was that natural law, God's law, it was so obvious that genociding people based off their identifiable characteristics is an atrocity that anybody with a beating heart would know that it was wrong. So they invoked natural law in the Nuremberg trials, and I would argue that they promoted not natural law by defeating the Nazis. But I'm just saying it's not an absolute obligation because it can't be. The world's too big. It was Robert Jackson, by the way, Wick, if you're Googling.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm just, I might have to go in a minute here, so I do apologize. I just had a question for you, Ryan, just real quick, just hypothetical, because is your only objection to securing the rights of free speech and the other natural rights is a pragmatic one, a practical one, I should say, that we can't? Like, say we got the means to enforce our will on all other countries, and there was little they could do to stop us, right? And it was reasonably expensive, inexpensive. Like, we wouldn't pay much of a price for this. Should the U.S. enforce the standards of natural law to ensure that everyone gets access to rights such as free speech and things like that?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. I tend to agree with this, to be clear.
I think that I think that we've gotten lost in this kind of like cultural relativity where we're like, oh, can you really say free speech is better than not free speech? Can you yes, you can. Free speech is better than not free speech. It's not a relative question. One is better than the other. And I think we can be honest about that.
I have a curiosity about that because I know that came up earlier in the argument too. So the ought question, ought we be, I don't know, meddling in other people's business?
Well, see, that's where it gets tricky, right? Because like the way I framed it is that our moral obligation to the world is to promote natural law, right? Not because you raised the thorny question here, right? Like, let's say we meddle in someone's business, and Wick gave the hypo where it just works. Yeah. But the truth is, let's say you go in and you try to do something, you go boots on the ground, you do Afghanistan, then you withdraw and the fucking Taliban comes in, and now, women can't learn to read anymore. Like, did we make it better or make it worse? If the goal is to promote natural law, not all interventions are going to be effective. So you have to start weighing what's going to work and what's not going to work.
And this is the unfortunate thing. There are some things that we should morally do that we simply cannot. And I wish we could, right? If I had my druthers, we would, but we simply can't. We don't have the resources. We don't have the political will. There's a host of reasons that we cannot do what I think we should do in certain cases.
You presented the if and then said, then we ought. But the problem with that is the if. So you say a hypothetical, well, if I had the means to. So it's kind of like, you're in the house, and I've used this example before, and there's a gang coming into the house. Ought you stick around and defend your land? Is it worth all of that, or should you take your family and run? So the idea that certain defenses are necessary, when in reality, in natural law, it would be foolish. It just serves no purpose for you to stay and defend or to meddle in other people's business to try to liberate.
Can I ask you this, Clay?
Part of the origin of my question was about the morality, and bringing it up was the fact that I think part of the thing that completely frayed the idea of the international order through international laws was us starting to support people like Russia, like China. That is what, if as much as anything, killed our credibility when we're pumping money to places like Saudi Arabia, and they're trying to do their own little, kill them all situations.
It's, unfortunate. But can I ask
I would have preferred that we had a lot more moral clarity than we've had.
Can I ask you a question?
I would like to ask, when is it a good time to take your family and run? Define that, and you might get the answer you're looking for.
I think it depends. Like Clay,
does depend.
Can I ask you a question?
Depends on what?
It depends
on
the
factors. Can you reasonably expect to defend your family? Is this a hill worth dying on? And there are certain things, and this is a kind of transitions to my question to Clay. Like, say that is there any kind of position or cause that you, even though the victory is very uncertain, and in fact a very low chance of successfully doing a thing, like say you're in your house at night, okay, a bunch of thugs roll up, they're bigger than you, they're stronger than you, they're more well armed than you. You can have two choices here. You can stay and fight and probably lose, or you could run and they get your house, they maybe hurt one of your family members, all these things, these negative things happen, but you'll be safe. Should you stand and fight knowing that you will probably lose, or do you run because the pragmatic part of you is like, I can't actually stop this, I need to go, right? I need to go and live to fight another day, basically. Like, and
so
that's a hard question.
So you're talking about the fight or flight syndrome.
Yeah.
So in the Marines, they call it advancing to the rear. They don't call it retreat. Isn't it funny? But for real. So you don't put yourself in that sacrificial position when you know that it is an absolute sacrifice, unless, and this is the only caveat, unless there's reinforcements coming.
Well, this is the question. Like, this is the thing. We don't have a crystal ball, and you know that probably you will lose 90%. Do you stay because of that 10%?
You would lose the battle, but then are you confident that the war will be won?
Fair enough.
Right.
People can answer this differently. I don't know. There are certain situations and scenarios where even if there's only like a 10-15% chance, I might just stay because if I don't, then I will lose something that is so dear to me that would just be unacceptable. It would
right. So then now we are really discussing the oughts, the morality, the pragmatism versus the ought, because the pragmatism actually does skip the ought and
I disagree. I think that in certain scenarios, like it depends. There in certain scenarios, the ought is informed by can we, right? Like, is this possible to do? If it's not possible to do, then ought we? Probably not. But there are certain situations where you're correct. We ought to behave in a certain way, even if we will lose. Those are rare, but they exist.
The ought takes into account the greater good, whereas the pragmatism does not.
I don't know if I agree with that statement either, frankly.
Yeah, and the problem with all this stuff is it gets so, it's like, it reminds me of when you talk about like police use of force cases, because one of the problems is that the U.S. is a repeat player. So you end up with these situations where it's like, are you going to live to fight the other day? But also you got to be able to continue to interact with these other countries, which is, I think, where Wick was going a lot of the time with the need to keep up goodwill. But also you've got to keep interacting with these other countries, so you can't like be their bitch punching bag either, right? And it's like the ultimately geopolitics is the most complicated thing. Like if you were going to pick the things on Earth, geopolitics is the most complicated one. So
I think it's women, frankly.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I mean,
women and then geopolitics.
Well, I agree. This is also why I brought up the whole Nash's equilibrium thing. Like the whole point of the Nash's equilibrium is that your best strategy is to make sure that every other player in the game is maintaining their strategy that way, because you know their strategy now. Deviations create chaos and can hurt you in what you're interested in. If I know how everyone's playing the game because I made the game, i.e. international law, without deviation, I can know how the system is going to run more efficiently for me. Right? But if we're in a chaotic system where everyone's doing fucked up shit, I can't, guarantee that my oil is going to get through the Strait of Hormuz without hitting a mine, and that's going to cost people billions of dollars, and that'll have downward effects into the oil industry and gas prices, and people get pissed, and then that makes politics go crazy, and then someone gets ousted. It's all butterfly effect. If I can control the board through international law and have that strategy, then it's to my interest more than the chaotic world.
It's like sacrificing, just real quick. It's like sacrifice, like in chess. There are times when it's in your best interest to lose a pawn or lose a piece.
Absolutely.
Right? And yes, in the short term, it might hurt you. It gives you positional advantage, and it lets you win the game overall, right? And I think that geopolitics and international law and obeying international law is similar. There are positions you could be in where it makes sense to sacrifice your rook or even your queen in order to get a checkmate and win.
Well, here's the problem that you run into. You're not going to find favor with the people, because the people see the government as being under the Constitution. So back to my constitutional argument. So people, especially that understand.
Well, also our attention spans have gone to almost zero, and that's a problem.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really tricky because when you make these analogies to like chess or something like this, right? Like, okay, let's call the international rules-based order is chess, right? You're playing the game of chess, but the stakes are real high. If you lose, if your king is checkmated, you get shot in the face, right? So as long as you're winning, these rules seem fine. But when you start losing, at a certain point, you might go, wait a minute. Am I allowed to just pick up my king and walk away from the board? And if I am, maybe I don't want to get shot in the face. So this is where the analogy breaks down.
But you can't walk away from the board, right? You're still in the world.
But
walking away from the board is well.
Well, but in international law, we are allowed to walk away from these commitments.
Once the king,
you can't walk the consequences of what's happening in the world.
And to be clear, it's not just one game of chess. It's thousands of games of chess that you're playing with many other people.
This is the question I was trying to ask.
Continue to happen. Right?
I agree with his equilibrium theory as long as we're winning. The question is when you start losing, and this is what Europe's facing. Europe has basically admitted that they're in managed decline. Like they're just not ever going to be the dominant power again. They are in managed decline. And when you start realizing you're losing, do you say, well, I value stability, so I'm going to go into managed decline, and I guess China gets to be the alpha now. It's their turn. Or do you say, screw that, we're going to do something about it? And when you do something about it, you are going to break the status quo.
Oh, just real quick, I do have to go. I love you all.
Yeah.
Just so everyone can find me, Wick TV, on YouTube, on Twitch.
Wick is amazing.
I love you all.
Thank you so much, Wick.
Bye-bye.
What a good conversation.
What a good time, gang. Did you guys enjoy that? Hold on. Hold. Let me get up here and say bye-bye to all of you. Okay? Give me a second. Hold. Did you guys like the debate? I liked the debate. I thought it was fun. But maybe I liked the debate because yesterday was crazy. So this is what happens on Wick TV. You sometimes get crazy, and you sometimes get calm. You didn't like the debate, Slippers? You thought it was absolute cancer? I'm sorry. Well, it is what it is, I suppose. It is what it is, I suppose. But anyway, thank you for coming on, having a conversation with me, watching the debate. What do you guys think? Did you guys like it in YouTube chat land? Thank you again, Brozufso, for the 10 Wick TV Gift TV memberships. Thank you, Ripped Cripper, for $5 to say Malali is a disgusting, un-American loser. That's not very nice. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I appreciate you all. And I will talk to you guys next week. We got some great shows coming up. On Thursday, we're going to have IRI. We're going to have Hutch. We're going to have Stormwolf. And they're going to be fighting with Dev, Ryan Getty, and Sid. Should be fun. Liberalism. Is it worth protecting at all costs? At what point should we violate liberalism to protect liberalism? At any point? How extreme does it have to get? Anyway, I love you all. See you guys later.